Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to 1850. A time before phones, before Netflix, before electricity even. Somehow, against all odds, people still manage to have fun. But here's your reality check. You probably won't survive this. I mean it. No streaming, no group chats, no coffee on demand. Just you, some candlelight, a corset or a cravat, and a whole lot of social expectations. You think you're introverted now? Try being a Victorian with no excuse to ghost your neighbours. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your city and the time you're listening in the comments. I love knowing where and when these sleepy little history dives reach you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in someone's parlour, the good room, the one with the fancy wallpaper that looks like it might be covered in 1,000 delicate fungi, and furniture you absolutely cannot sit on unless you're married into the family or dying. There's a fire in the grate, though it mostly smokes and sulks, and candles flicker with that waxy lemon glow that makes everyone's faces look either heartbreakingly angelic or like a haunted potato. It's the evening. And in the absence of electricity, the Victorian family gathers to do the only sensible thing after supper. Play weird games with names like the minister's cat and hunt the thimble. You join in. You don't really get the rules, but that's fine. No one ever fully explains anything. Not really. This is parlour gaming, and your job is to perform enjoyment, and perhaps, by some miracle, even have some. In the minister's cat, you go around in a circle, each person naming the cat with an adjective that starts with the next letter of the alphabet. The minister's cat is an angry cat. The minister's cat is a boastful cat, and so on. If you hesitate, you're out. Simple, right? Except the pressure mounts fast, especially if your brain freezes at Q or X. Someone always yells xenophobic, and the room goes silent for a second. Then awkward laughter breaks the ice. This game, and others like it, thrive on rhythm, embarrassment, and quick thinking. So basically, it's 19th century improv with corsets. Charades is another big hit, though not quite the version you know. In Victorian charades, it's more like a full-blown drama performance. You act out syllables of a word using elaborate miming, props, or even costume changes, while the rest of the room guesses. If someone shouts bicycle before you've even gotten to the final syllable, you're either a genius or your miming is tragically obvious. Either way, well done. Not all games are high energy. Consequences is more relaxed, on paper at least. You each write part of a story on a folded bit of paper, pass it around, and add to it without seeing what came before. The final reveal is usually a surreal mashup. Mr. Pickles met Queen Victoria at a fish market. He said, "I've lost my hat." She said, "Only fools keep secrets in sardines." And the consequence was, they were both turned into velvet cushions. Everyone laughs politely except Aunt Judith, who thinks consequences should be moral, not metaphorical. Now, here's something peculiar. Many parlour games also served as an excuse to get close to someone, especially if you were young and unmarried and hadn't yet been successfully paired off by your overbearing great-aunt. There's blind man's bluff, where you're blindfolded and stumble around the room trying to tag someone. Spoiler alert, you often accidentally grab the hand of the person you've been crushing on all year. The rules are just fuzzy enough to let flirtation bloom without any official scandal, though scandal is always one slip away. You get the sense that Victorians were both extremely repressed and constantly finding new ways to bump into each other on purpose. It's a delicate dance of strict etiquette and secret longing, all played out under flickering candlelight and the constant threat of catching your skirts on fire. And even as you play, you start to notice something else. These games, silly as they are, form a kind of social glue. Without phones or movies to fill the silence, people had to do things together to stay connected. Games gave people permission to be silly, to improvise, to drop their guards just a little. Even the stiffest uncle eventually cracks a smile during Pass the Slipper, especially when he's been fooled by the slipper being passed behind his back over and over, while he squints suspiciously into the faces of innocent children. There's even a game where you tell a ghost story word by word, each person adding a sentence. And somehow, it always ends with a candle going out, a loud knock at the door, or someone revealing they were dead all along. It's always the butler, or the governess, or that weird child who never blinks. Historically, these parlour games weren't just for giggles. They were a real part of social training, especially for women. Being witty, charming, and just flirtatious enough, without causing a scandal, was practically a survival skill. In fact, there's a whole body of etiquette literature that explains which games are suitable for mixed company, and which might encourage undue familiarity. Translation: you might accidentally hold hands with someone not yet vetted by your parents. Scandalous. Here's a fun little fringe fact. Some families went all in on parlour theatricals. They had scripts, props, even little makeshift curtains. Think Victorian cosplay, but instead of Marvel heroes, you're all just doing dramatic readings of Shakespeare, or pretending to be characters from a Gothic novel. And yes, someone's always in drag. It's the rules. But not everyone agreed this was fun. Some religious critics of the time thought these games encouraged idleness, vanity, and unchristian levels of laughter. One particularly grumpy reverend even suggested that charades could weaken moral fortitude and inspire frivolity, which honestly kind of makes you want to play even more. Modern historians debate just how widespread these games were across all classes. Some say they were mostly the domain of the upper middle classes and above, those who had time and space to indulge. Others argue versions of them filtered down into working class homes and community gatherings, adapted and passed on like folk songs. There's no clear answer, but one thing's for sure: no electricity didn't mean no entertainment. So here you are, surrounded by candlelight, laughter, and just a little bit of tension. The good kind. Your corset might be tight, your cravat itchy, but for a few hours the night is warm, the slipper is still in play, and no one's asked you to recite Latin. Yet. You've barely recovered from the chaos of blind man's bluff, and a deeply competitive round of the minister's cat, when someone proposes a change of pace. And just like that, the parlour doors swing open. Well, not literally, and the crowd drifts naturally toward a familiar ritual. Tea. Not just the drink. Oh no! This is the full Victorian tea party experience, and if you thought it was all just porcelain cups and tiny sandwiches, you're hilariously mistaken. This is social theatre, and in 1850 you're on stage whether you like it or not. First, the setting. Picture a room soaked in warm afternoon light, filtered through layers of lace curtains that do absolutely nothing to block the chill. The hostess has gone all out. Embroidered linen on the table, a matching tea set with enough gold trim to blind you, and at least 3 varieties of cake that look divine but taste vaguely of laundry starch and Protestant restraint. You're seated according to your social usefulness, not your personality. Got a title? You're near the hostess, known to be amusing but not dangerous, front and centre. A little too loud, too unmarried, or too political. Near the ferns. The tea itself is hot and strong, usually black, often overbrewed, and comes with milk and sugar because the British palate still recoils in horror at unsoftened flavour. You sip carefully, not because it's too hot, but because everything is being judged. The way you hold your cup, how often you stir, whether or not your pinky finger betrays you, it all matters, and heaven help you if you slurp. You might as well announce your intentions to rob a post office. Still, as the room hums with conversation, something magical happens. People start relaxing, just a little. The formal layers peel back, gossip begins to bubble. Did you hear what happened to the vicar's niece? She was seen walking, mind you, with that fellow from Bristol. No chaperone. Not even a third cousin. You pretend not to listen, but everyone listens. Gossip is the beating heart of the Victorian Tea Party. It's not just entertainment, it's information management, reputation warfare, strategic sabotage disguised as curiosity. And if you can drop a juicy tidbit with the right arch of your eyebrow, you might just win the afternoon. There's an art to it. Saying something scandalous enough to spark intrigue but veiled enough to avoid responsibility. Oh, I wouldn't dream of naming names, you whisper, then name them anyway. The best players never get caught. The worst. They end up uninvited next week and officially on a rescue in Wales. But tea parties weren't only about gossip and judging biscuit texture. They were also a vital space for social mobility, especially for women. In an age when marriage was still a career path, and being seen in the right drawing room could literally change your life, being invited to the right tea was everything. One good impression, one well-timed laugh, one gentle nudge toward a bachelor with land. It could all set the wheels of destiny in motion. And then there's the unspoken battle over intellectual credibility. Sure, the conversation starts with the weather, but it doesn't stay there. Someone always brings up a novel. Tonight it's Jane Eyre, and suddenly the room is aflame with opinions. She's far too headstrong. A governess with that sort of independence? Absurd. She's a woman of integrity. Besides, Rochester is clearly a Byronic hero. He's a menace with a wife in the attic. You sip your tea slowly and say nothing, but internally you're screaming. Thank you. Finally. Some actual fire. These debates are more than literary opinion. They're ideological territory. Feminism is still a whispered concept, cloaked in layers of moral caution. But books offer a place to push those boundaries. When you side with Jane, you're not just talking fiction. You're taking a stand on womanhood, autonomy, and love that doesn't require a dowry. Every tea party comes with this subtle tug-of-war between tradition and rebellion, all under the dainty disguise of cucumber sandwiches. Now here's a fringe fact for you. Tea parties weren't always the polite pastel affairs they're remembered as. In some circles, especially among intellectuals and the artistic crowd, they got a bit wild. Think absinthe in the teacups, tarot cards under the side table, and someone reading scandalous poetry once the older relatives dozed off. Of course, this happened behind closed curtains, far from the ears of the local vicar. And speaking of rebellion, some radical tea parties, yes, that was a real phrase, were hotbeds for suffragist discussion and secret planning. Not everyone sipping Earl Grey was planning their wedding. Some were planning their revolution. Still, not everyone loved this form of socialising. There was, and still is, scholarly debate about how empowering these gatherings actually were. Were tea parties subversive little bubbles of female agency, or just another form of social surveillance keeping everyone polite, well-behaved and loyal to Queen and country? Some historians argue they were both safe spaces and velvet cages. It's one of those paradoxes that makes history weirdly modern. As the clock ticks closer to twilight, someone pulls out a small box of bonbons, a rare treat. The hostess insists they're from Paris, but everyone knows her cousin works at the local apothecary, and probably snuck them in with a shipment of cough lozenges. Still, they're sweet and unusual, and in this moment they feel decadent. You stretch your legs beneath the table and feel the stiff hem of your underskirt brush against the ankles of the person beside you. You glance over. A small smile, a spark. Did you just make a connection over peppermint fondant? Maybe, or maybe it was just the sugar rush. Eventually people start to rise one by one, offering thanks and compliments. What a lovely spread. Those cucumber sandwiches were divine. I do hope to see you Thursday, if the weather holds. The room clears gently, like steam from a warm cup. You step out into the late afternoon air, cheeks pink, ears still ringing with whispers and laughter. It was just tea, technically, just cups and conversation, but in 1850 it was everything. By now you're a little winded from all the social manoeuvring. The tea is settling in your stomach, your gloves are starting to feel like slow-motion torture devices, and you could use something a bit less choreographed. And right on cue someone suggests an outing. To the theatre, of course. This is 1850 after all, and Netflix hasn't been invented yet, so if you want to be moved by a dramatic monologue or watch a grown man pretend to be a tree, you're going to have to put on your best hat and go out into the world. So you do. You bundle up, navigate a muddy street with the grace of a soggy cat, and soon enough, you're standing outside a grand old theatre, its facade lit by flickering gas lamps and smelling faintly of horses, roast chestnuts, and anticipation. The building is large and creaky, held together by centuries of performances and the sheer willpower of overly dramatic actors. You push through the crowd, rich, poor, curious, bored, all mashed together, and step inside. Immediately you're hit with the smell. It's a cocktail of damp velvet, candle wax, dusty wood, and an occasional waft of unwashed ambition. You get used to it. Mostly. Your seat is, let's call it modest. You're in the gallery, which means your view of the stage is slightly blocked by a carved cherub who looks like it's about to weep from lead poisoning. You settle in anyway, brushing crumbs off the bench from whoever sat here last. Around you, there's a hum. Noisy, alive. People shout greetings across rows. Children wiggle on laps. Someone a few seats down is definitely opening a flask under their coat. This isn't a hushed, reverent Broadway crowd. This is theatre in 1850, and it's loud, rowdy, and possibly slightly flammable. The lights dim, well, the gas jets hiss lower, and the stage comes alive. Tonight's show is a tragedy, naturally. It always is. Either that or some kind of Shakespearean mashup that's been wildly adapted to suit Victorian tastes, meaning someone might get stabbed, poisoned, or dramatically wander the moors in a monologue that lasts 12 minutes. The lead actor is beloved, a local legend with grand gestures, a moustache that deserves its own billing, and a voice that could probably shatter teacups. You watch as he strides across the stage, cloak flapping like a dramatic bird, and deliver lines like, "I loved thee with a flame brighter than the gaslight." Everyone swoons a little. Even you. It's hard not to. And then, halfway through Act 2, someone faints. It's not uncommon. Theatres are hot, crowded, and filled with tightly laced corsets and overwrought emotions. A woman in the row behind you lets out a small gasp and gently slides to the floor like a swan made of starch. Her friend fans her with a programme, a nearby man offers brandy, and the actors don't even pause. This is all part of the experience. Theatres in 1850 aren't just about the play, they're a full-body immersion in Victorian society. You're seeing and being seen. Who's sitting in the boxes? Who brought whom? Who's pretending to like Shakespeare but clearly just came for the sword fights? It's all on display, like one big socially acceptable surveillance network wrapped in crinoline. Historically, theatre in this era is booming. It's become more accessible, more democratic. You've got the big players like London's Drury Lane, and the smaller town theatres trying to keep up with scandalous melodramas and spectacle-heavy productions. If there's a play about a woman who kills her cheating husband with a paperweight, it's probably sold out. And yes, the Victorians love spectacle. If there's a chance to add a real fire on stage, a mechanical ghost, or a fake thunder machine that nearly deafens the front row, it's going in. One famous show even featured a live horse on stage, which promptly panicked and knocked over a portion of the scenery. The audience gave it a standing ovation. You might also catch a pantomime or burlesque, both wildly popular and full of satire, cross-dressing, and slightly questionable morals wrapped in musical numbers. Queen Victoria might not approve, but the crowd eats it up. It's theatre as rebellion, as comedy, as a mirror held up to the odd hypocrisies of the day. Here's a fun fringe fact. Audience participation is a real thing. If the villain is especially evil, people boo. If a line falls flat, someone might heckle. If a lead actress is beloved, flowers are thrown. And if she's not, well, tomatoes are cheap and plentiful. The fourth wall is not sacred. You cheer, you jeer, you live the drama as much as you watch it. And yet, there's another side to the experience. The danger. Gaslighting, for example. It gives the stage that flickering golden glow, yes. But it also fills the air with fumes and the very real risk of accidental combustion. There are stories, some true, some exaggerated, of dresses catching fire mid-performance, of theatres burning down within minutes. One London theatre famously collapsed in 1856, though thankfully not during a show. Still, you always watch with one eye on the nearest exit, just in case. Scholars still debate how much high culture theatre actually reached the working classes. Some argue it was mostly a middle and upper class pursuit, sanitised and moralised for respectable audiences. Others claim the theatre was a shared cultural space, where even the lower galleries held their own kind of theatrical education. What's not up for debate is its importance. Theatre was the entertainment hub, a mix of news, art, gossip, and community catharsis. Back in your seat, you notice your neighbour has nodded off, chin bobbing with every dramatic thunderclap from the stage. You, however, are glued to the action. There's been a betrayal, a dramatic death, and now the heroine is standing in the ruins of her family estate, weeping under a painted moon. The actor beside her, her lover, villain, or both, is delivering a final speech in iambic pentameter, while probably thinking about the ale waiting backstage. And then, curtain. The audience erupts. Applause, stomping, the occasional shriek of joy. The cast takes their bows. Someone shouts, "Encore!" even though the entire thing has been emotionally exhausting. Your hands are sore from clapping, your mind is buzzing, and for a moment you forget how stiff your chair was, or how someone spilled mulled wine down your coat. The lights rise again, and the spell breaks. You file out with the crowd, back into the chilly evening air, heart still pounding from the tragic finale. No electricity, no screen, no surround sound. Just candlelight, talent, and a room full of strangers swept up in the same story. Your head still spinning from the theatre, the gaslights, the echoing voices, the tragically swooning heroine, but the night is young, and so, apparently, are your ankles. Barely back home and someone suggests a dance. Not just any dance. A full-blown Victorian assembly. A social event so structured, so intensely choreographed, it might as well be a military operation disguised in lace and powdered wigs. The invitation says to arrive by 8, but you know better. The fashionably late window is narrow, and showing up early brands you as either overeager or recently unwed. So you time it perfectly, stepping into the ballroom just as the orchestra begins to tune. The room is ablaze with candles, glittering with mirrors, and practically humming with the collective stress of everyone trying not to step on someone else's foot, or feelings. Let's get something straight. Dancing in 1850 isn't for the faint of heart, or the weak of stamina. This isn't swaying awkwardly to bad Spotify playlists. This is work. The quadrille alone is a 4-couple formation dance with more rules than an aristocrat's dinner party. You have to memorise steps, follow the caller, and hope your partner remembers not to spin you into a wall. You take your place, fingers barely touching your partner's gloved hand. There's a moment of tension. Will they lead well? Will they smell like cloves and crushed dreams? But then the music starts, and everything moves. You glide, you bow, you switch partners, you curtsy so often your thighs start questioning your choices. You dance the waltz, which, by the way, was once considered dangerously scandalous because of the way it involved actual touching. Can you believe it? 2 humans, hand in hand, spinning gently in a circle while maintaining eye contact for longer than 3 seconds. The horror. Yet here you are, swept into it. The room spins, gowns swish, cravats flutter. There's laughter, whispered asides, and a few rogue dancers getting just a little too enthusiastic with their footwork. Someone crashes into a potted palm. The palm survives. The dignity does not. Victorian dances weren't just entertainment. They were matchmaking arenas. Every step, every touch, every timed glance was a coded message, an invitation, a warning, a polite deflection. It's less about the music and more about the performance of grace, restraint, and subtle flirtation. Your dance card is your social resume, and heaven help you if it's empty by the 3rd quadrille. Of course, there are rules. So many rules. Gloves must be worn. Physical contact must be minimal. Eyes must remain respectfully averted, unless you're signalling interest, in which case, allow exactly 1.5 seconds of longing gaze before looking away modestly. Too much interest, you're branded forward. Too little, you're boring. There's no winning, only waltzing. You excuse yourself for a moment to catch your breath. Along the walls, older chaperones watch like hawks, mothers with agendas, fathers pretending to be relaxed while evaluating suitors like livestock. Everyone's watching, everyone's calculating. That man with the decent posture and unfortunate sideburns, his father owns land. That girl who just did a flawless poker turn, her dowry includes a small fleet of ships. Love is an option, but so is a strategic merger. Still, there's something romantic here too, something innocent even. A few moments of shared rhythm, of moving in harmony. You catch the eye of someone across the floor, not a partner yet, just a potential. They smile, you smile back. That's the kind of risk worth taking. Now here's a quirky historical twist. Some Victorians took dance so seriously they actually trained at special schools. Think of them as the soul cycle of their day, but with more taffeta. Young ladies were drilled in posture, balance and movement, while young men were repeatedly scolded for being clumsy or not owning enough waistcoats. Some instruction manuals from the time read like battlefield strategy guides. Approach with confident reserve. Engage gently. Retreat with elegance. Oh, and here's your fringe fact for the night. Dance floors in wealthier venues were often sprinkled with crushed resin or beeswax to give better glide. Sounds nice, right? Except when someone spills a drink, and suddenly the waltz turns into a slow-motion skating accident. Very graceful. Very on brand for the era. Back to you. The orchestra starts another set, a schottisch, which is both a dance and a tongue twister. You're paired with someone new. He's got good balance, a decent jawline, and seems to know the steps. You swirl around the room in perfectly timed rhythm, only faltering once when a stray dog, yes, really, wanders in from an open side door and joins the circle for a brief, majestic two-step before being quietly escorted out by a butler. As the night stretches on, you realise that each dance, each movement is part of a larger unspoken story. These aren't just moments of amusement, they're rituals, community rituals, courtship rituals, markers of time, place and identity in a world constantly trying to balance propriety with passion. But there's an undercurrent here too. Not everyone fits into the rigid choreography of Victorian society. Some stumble, some refuse the dance altogether. There's debate among historians about whether these gatherings were truly inclusive or deeply exclusionary. The answer, as always, is both. For every heart fluttering with the thrill of a perfectly executed turn, there's another resigned to sitting in the corner, waiting for a chance that might never come. Still, for tonight, the music plays on. The final waltz begins, a slower, softer melody. You're tired, your shoes pinch, your hair is threatening to collapse under the weight of 36 strategically placed pins. But when someone offers their hand, you take it. Because what else is there to do? You dance. And as you move in slow circles under the glint of candlelight and chandeliers, you realise something else. This is fun. Real fun. Exhausting, structured, socially loaded fun. But fun nonetheless, and without a single plug in sight. Morning arrives slowly, as if it too needs extra time to lace its corset and adjust its collar. You're sore from dancing, a little groggy from a night spent reliving every social misstep, and very much in need of something quieter. Something that doesn't involve gliding, bowing or dodging elbows in a sweaty ballroom. So today, you embrace the crown jewel of solo entertainment in 1850. Reading. Books are everywhere. Well, almost everywhere. They're expensive, yes, and heavy, and sometimes banned if the content gets too spicy or philosophical. But by mid-century, printing has become just affordable enough to turn literature into a kind of moral oxygen. You can't live without it. And in your household, there's at least one table groaning under the weight of novels, sermons, and an encyclopedia that no one's opened since the First Reform Act. You settle into a high-backed chair by the window, one with a view of a suspiciously smug sparrow and a child struggling to push a hoop down the road with a stick. Comfort is relative. The cushion is lumpy, the armrests are worn, but the light is good, and more importantly, the book is new. Well, not new in the modern sense. This is 1850. There's no Amazon, no overnight shipping, and no e-book to download while still in your pyjamas. But the town lending library, or your wealthy uncle with suspiciously good taste, has provided you with the latest novel by a certain Mr. Charles Dickens. It's David Copperfield, and it smells like ink and adventure. You crack it open with reverence. This isn't just escapism, it's transport. You're plunged into another world, following David through hardship and hope, wading through dense descriptions, absurd characters, and emotional ambushes disguised as run-on sentences. It's not fast, not breezy, but it's rich. You savour it like treacle pudding. A little goes a long way, and here's where it gets interesting. In 1850, most novels are published in serial form. That means a chapter or two released every month, like literary episodes. You have to wait for the next part. Wait. Like some Dickensian Netflix with the worst buffering of all time. It's torture and anticipation all at once. People crowd around bookshop windows, fight over copies, write fan letters, and even send the authors unsolicited ideas for plot twists. Reading isn't just personal, it's communal. Families read aloud to each other in the evenings, voices rising and falling in rhythm with the prose. You might be doing the voices yourself, deep and raspy for villains, fluttery and breathy for fainting heroines, and overly nasal for whichever character the author clearly dislikes. It's theatre, but cheaper, and without the stage makeup. And it's not just Dickens. You've got Charlotte Brontë, whose heroines burn with inner fire while trapped in grey, wind-blasted estates. Elizabeth Gaskell, with her biting portraits of industrial towns. Wilkie Collins, who basically invents the psychological thriller while pretending it's all very respectable. Even Mary Shelley, who's still sending shivers down spines from the grave, her monster roaming the cultural landscape like a warning in Boots. You thumb through your book as the fire crackles behind you, and outside, rain starts tapping on the windows like it's asking to be let in. This is peak Victorian cosy, except, of course, your chair is made of wood, your dress is heavy enough to injure a cow, and your tea has gone cold because someone forgot to stoke the hearth properly. But still, cosy. Reading becomes a ritual, a quiet rebellion, a way to travel far from rigid schedules and suffocating etiquette. Even the Queen reads, though scholars debate whether she truly understood Dickens or just liked the illustrations. And here's your quirky fact for the day. Some enterprising Victorians actually formed reading clubs, complete with rules, dues, and sometimes even uniforms. These clubs weren't just social gatherings, they were literary battlegrounds. Debates got heated, friendships were tested. One club in Derby reportedly banned any mention of Jane Austen for being too glib, while another required each member to write a 5-page review after every book or face public reading of their worst poem. That'll keep you honest. But not everyone sees novels as salvation. There's a sharp divide in 1850 between worthy books and what critics called sensational trash. Penny dreadfuls, cheap lurid serials, were accused of corrupting young minds with tales of crime, ghosts, and emotionally unstable governesses. Some newspapers even claimed reading too many novels could cause nervous instability or facial tremors. Yes, you heard that right. Too much fiction, and your eyebrows might betray you. There's scholarly debate over the real impact of these books. Were they empowering the masses or distracting them from real issues? Were women being liberated by stories that gave them inner lives, or simply pacified? The answer depends on who you ask. But you, sitting in your chair, lost in David's misadventures and Mr. Micawber's eternal optimism, aren't worried about social theory right now. You're just trying to find out what happens next. Eventually you have to pause, the candles flickering dangerously low, your eyes are dry, and your backside has fused to the upholstery. You mark your place with a scrap of ribbon, tuck the book under your arm, and stretch. Maybe tonight you'll read aloud to your younger cousin, who insists on interrupting every sentence with questions like, "What's a debtor's prison?" and "Is this lady going to die soon?" She always does. You walk down the hall, book in hand, the floorboards creaking under your steps. A dog yawns in the corner. The rain continues its soft drumbeat on the glass. Somewhere, someone is setting up for another evening of charades, but not you. Tonight it's just you, the candlelight, and the next chapter. And somehow, that's more than enough. You'd think after all the dancing, reading and theatre, the Victorian appetite for entertainment might ease up a bit. But no, this is 1850, and leisure isn't just a luxury, it's a full-time job, especially if you're middle or upper class, and trying desperately to appear cultured without accidentally being too interesting. So today, you're off to something gentler, something domestic, yet socially charged in its own quiet way, the sewing circle. Now before you scoff, let's be clear. This isn't just a bunch of women darning socks and discussing embroidery stitches. Well, okay, there's a lot of darning and stitching, and occasionally someone gets poked with a needle and pretends not to cry. But there's also something else here. Underneath the thimbles and thread, the sewing circle is one of the few semi-private spaces where conversation can breathe, stories can unfold, and social hierarchies can be both reinforced and subtly defied. You enter a small drawing room that smells faintly of lavender sachets, beeswax polish, and biscuits that were probably delicious last Thursday. The women are already seated, skirts like flower petals in tight formation, around a central table cluttered with sewing baskets, teacups, and a scandalously large pot of strawberry jam. You take your seat, arrange your work, maybe a bit of smocking on a baby gown, or a delicate repair on an unfortunate lace cuff, and try not to look as though you're listening too closely. But you are, because sewing circles, for all their ladylike exterior, are hotbeds of information, opinion, and storytelling. Today's conversation opens on safe ground. The weather, which is always dreadful, and the recent frost that took out Mrs. Plum's dahlias. But very quickly, things shift. "I heard her nephew's been dismissed from his post," someone murmurs, snipping thread with a tiny pair of scissors shaped like a stalk. "Some business with a borrowed sum. Did he return it? No, but he meant to." This is the kind of a line that could fill 3 weeks of speculation. You keep stitching, feigning focus, but your ears are pricked. Because after the gossip comes the real entertainment, the stories. Some are family tales, dressed up just enough to protect identities. Others are old legends passed down like heirlooms. Tonight, someone starts telling the one about the ghost in the north field, the one who walks only during harvest and only if the moon is high. The others laugh, but they don't laugh too hard. Not when the wind howls like that against the shutters. As you stitch, your fingers working almost independently now, you realise how central these stories are, not just to the circle, but to the culture. In a time when books are still a luxury and formal education limited for many, oral storytelling fills the gap. It teaches, entertains, and sometimes warns. You remember last week's tale about the girl who ran off with a soldier and ended up living in a cave, barefoot and regretting every decision she'd ever made. Half cautionary tale, half romantic fantasy. The rhythm of the sewing and the stories blend into a kind of domestic music. Snip, stitch, murmur, laugh. Someone spills a bit of tea on their muslin and curses softly before remembering where she is. Another woman starts a quiet thread about her sister-in-law's new maid who might be French or possibly Welsh, depending on who you ask, and definitely stole the silver teaspoon. Maybe. Here's a quirky little side note. Some Victorian sewing circles were fundraising machines. Women would meet weekly not just to mend clothes or share stories, but to craft items for local charities, churches and social causes. Needlework became activism in disguise. Embroidered handkerchiefs sold at bazaars to fund hospital beds. Quilts auctioned to support orphanages. One group even stitched samplers with Bible verses and shipped them to missionaries abroad, hoping salvation could be cross-stitched into someone's soul. But while some scholars praise these circles as early spaces for female empowerment and community action, others point out their limitations. After all, the attendees are often from similar social classes, and anyone too different, too poor, too outspoken, too unmarried at an inconvenient age, might not get invited at all. Even empowerment has a dress code. Still, within these walls there's a kind of soft power at play. A young woman can quietly gather advice on marriage, childbirth, managing a household, or dealing with a difficult mother-in-law. An older widow can share her hard-won wisdom disguised as an anecdote about preserving lemons. The knowledge passed here isn't academic, but it's essential. Your hands are sore now, your thread tangled. Someone offers you another cup of tea, strong enough to stand a spoon in, and a slice of whatever that dense cake is that shows up at every meeting. You accept. The conversation turns toward more practical matters. The upcoming church fete, the best way to remove soot from linens, whether or not the postmaster's wife has been walking home with the baker's son again. All very casual, all very loaded. And here's your historical fact for the moment. Victorian girls were often taught needlework before they could properly read or write. Samplers served as both practice and proof. Small embroidered squares that displayed alphabet letters, numbers, and neat little moral phrases like, "Idleness is the devil's playground," which honestly makes you want to nap out of spite. As the circle winds down, the women begin to pack up their things, folding fabric with the same precision they apply to their public opinions. You roll up your project, half-finished, slightly crooked but acceptable, and smile your goodbyes. No one lingers. It's getting dark. Oil lamps are expensive, and everyone's got lives to return to, children to check on, bread to knead. You step outside and pull your shawl tight. The night air is crisp, the stars faint behind the clouds. You walk home slowly, thread still clinging to your skirts, stories still clinging to your memory. Some were true, some were not. Some might become true, depending on how they're retold. And that, you realise, is part of the fun. By now, you've gotten used to the rhythm of Victorian leisure, parlour games at night, tea and social tightropes in the afternoon, the occasional dramatic collapse into a fainting couch after a particularly spicy chapter of Jane Eyre. But this morning, your hosts have something different in mind. Something a little odder. You're invited to view a cabinet of curiosities, a private collection of rare, exotic and extremely questionable objects, lovingly hoarded by someone with too much disposable income and a deep need to impress dinner guests. You're not sure what to expect. A few fossils, maybe a seashell or two. Oh, sweet summer child. You step into the study, because of course it's always a study, never a regular room, and you're immediately overwhelmed by the sheer density of stuff. The walls are lined with shelves, every inch filled with glass cases, jars and display boxes. There are feathers and bones, beetles pinned under domed glass, a preserved bat clinging to a bit of driftwood like it died mid-conversation, and something that might be a shrunken head, or a really old apple. It's hard to say. Your host beams with pride. "Welcome," he says, gesturing like a magician, "to my humble collection." You smile politely, resisting the urge to ask why one shelf appears to be entirely devoted to teeth. In 1850, these cabinets, sometimes entire rooms, sometimes just actual cabinets, were the Victorian answer to both science and spectacle. The age of exploration had flooded England with objects from distant lands, and amateur collectors were eager to showcase their grasp of nature, culture, and the weirdest stuff they could possibly get their hands on. It was part education, part status symbol, and part unspoken competition. Whose collection could be the most obscure, the most disturbing, or the most likely to spark fainting spells in unsuspecting houseguests? You peer into a jar containing what is generously labelled sea serpent fragment. It looks suspiciously like a bit of twisted rope, but your host insists it was recovered from the coast of Cornwall during a lunar eclipse. There's also a two-headed toad, some scrimshaw carved with scenes too detailed for comfort, and a set of tiny shoes allegedly made for a monkey who once performed for the Tsar of Russia. You don't ask follow-up questions. One particularly dramatic piece, a taxidermy crocodile suspended from the ceiling like a Victorian chandelier, nearly takes your hat off when you turn around too quickly. "Shot it myself," your host says, even though he's never left Sussex and can't hold a rifle steady without sneezing, but no one calls him on it. That would ruin the fun. Because that's what this is, after all, a type of fun. Weird, macabre, and utterly fascinating. A blend of education and entertainment that lets you say you've engaged with natural history, while also gawking at a jar labelled Mummified Rat King. And here's your official historical fact of the day. Victorian cabinets of curiosity were the precursors to modern museums. These were often private collections, but over time many of them, especially those with scientific or cultural value, were donated to public institutions. The British Museum, the Ashmolean, and others owe some of their earlier specimens to these amateur collectors with a flair for the dramatic and a total disregard for temperature-controlled storage. But here's where things get uncomfortable, and not just because the stuffed owl in the corner won't stop staring at you. Many of the items in these cabinets were acquired through colonial channels. That means they were often taken, without consent, without context, from indigenous peoples and cultures around the world. Human remains, ceremonial artefacts, sacred objects, all repackaged for Victorian parlours as proof of the empire's reach and the collector's worldliness. There's still heated scholarly debate today about the ethics of these collections, especially when the line between science and spectacle gets blurry. Your host, of course, isn't thinking about any of this. He's too busy unveiling his prized possession, a glass orb filled with what appears to be preserved lightning. "Captured during the Great Storm of '46, he says reverently. "Terrifying night. Hair stood right on end. It's probably just a cracked glass ball with some soot inside, but you nod appreciatively. The fun isn't in the authenticity, it's in the performance, the storytelling. Each object is a doorway, a conversation starter, an excuse to imagine a world wilder and more magical than your own tidy, grey-tinged existence. A woman beside you whispers that she once saw a cabinet that contained Napoleon's hair. 3 strands, she says, wrapped in silk. You pretend to be impressed, even though you're now preoccupied with a truly unsettling mermaid skeleton displayed near the window. It has the torso of a monkey and the tail of a fish, and you can't tell if it's a hoax or a terrible accident. Either way, you're having a hard time looking away. You lean closer to a cracked label that reads, "Fiji specimen, handle with caution." Of course. The Victorian era was positively obsessed with fakes and oddities from the so-called exotic corners of the world. In fact, the infamous Fiji mermaid, part monkey, part fish, all nightmare, was exhibited in London in the 1840s and was a massive hit. No one believed it was real. No one wanted it to be. It was the idea of it that mattered. You begin to notice something else. There's a strange kind of beauty in all this. Even the more grotesque specimens have been arranged with care. Soft fabric backdrops, little handwritten placards, velvet-lined boxes. There's pride here, curiosity, and a genuine love for learning, even if the science is a bit off and the bat wings look suspiciously glued in place. Eventually the tour wraps up. Your host offers you a small pamphlet he's printed himself describing the more famous items in his collection, complete with wildly speculative footnotes and a questionable family crest stamped on the back. You accept it with the reverence of someone being handed an ancient scroll, then quietly tuck it into your coat. Stepping back into the hallway, you exhale. The world feels oddly normal now. Quiet, less feathered, less bottled. But your mind's still spinning, with strange facts, half-truths, and that horrible, wonderful mermaid face you'll probably see in your dreams tonight. And honestly, you can't wait to tell someone all about it. After a morning spent contemplating two-headed toads and slightly haunted taxidermy, you're craving something simpler, cleaner, more alive. So you do what any respectable Victorian with a parasol and repressed emotions does when the weather cooperates. You go for a country walk. Yes, a walk. Not just a stroll for health or errands, but a highly orchestrated, slow-paced meander through nature, with strategically timed glances and the possibility, however remote, of socially acceptable flirtation. It starts at the edge of the garden, where a narrow gravel path leads you past rows of neatly trimmed hedges and out toward the fields. The air is bright and just a little too crisp, like it's been ironed. You tighten your shawl and adjust your hat pins, aware that a single gust of wind could turn your headwear into a low-flying kite. The sky is full of soft grey clouds, those polite ones that don't necessarily mean rain, just passive-aggressive gloom. You're not walking alone, of course. This isn't a solitary affair. You're joined by a companion, someone respectable, possibly a cousin. Everyone's a cousin, and just charming enough to make the idea of marriage seem only mildly horrifying. You both walk at exactly the correct distance apart, close enough for conversation, far enough to avoid scandal. Every so often your arms brush. You pretend it's accidental. It isn't. The path winds through meadows dotted with wild flowers, and for a moment you forget your boots are 2 sizes too small and your corset is trying to kill you. It's quiet out here, in that rural, endless way. No carriages rattling past, no ticking clocks, just the occasional birdsong and the crunch of gravel underfoot. A sheep bleats in the distance. A cow stares at you like it knows all your secrets. Country walks were a staple of 1850s entertainment, especially in spring and summer when the mud didn't actively try to consume you. They were good for the health, so said the doctors. They were good for the soul, so said the poets. And let's be honest, they were an excellent excuse for conversation that wasn't monitored by chaperones or interrupted by Aunt Mildred insisting someone play the piano. As you pass through a gate and into a wooded glade, you and your companion begin to talk, not just about the weather, though of course you start there because protocol demands it, but also about books, music, and whether or not Mr. Norbury's sudden trip to Bath had anything to do with that widow with the suspiciously perfect eyebrows. You discuss the latest serial in the Illustrated London News, and whether steam trains are ruining the countryside or simply making it more convenient to escape your relatives. Your companion mentions a fondness for botany, and stoops to admire a cluster of bluebells. You try not to roll your eyes. Everyone's into botany these days. It's the polite person's way of saying, I'm very emotionally repressed, but here's a pressed flower as a token of my vague affection. Still, it's endearing. You smile and feign interest, while internally wondering how anyone tells the difference between a bluebell and a speedwell without a field guide and divine intervention. Here's your historical tidbit. Victorians were obsessed with the language of flowers. Every bloom had a coded meaning. A rose meant love, of course, but also came with variations. Red for passion, white for purity, yellow for jealousy. A violet signified modesty. A marigold meant grief. And heaven help you if someone sent you a bouquet of foxgloves. That's either insincerity or, I might poison you. Very romantic. This floral subtext added a whole secret layer to walks and picnics. A single picked flower could say everything you weren't allowed to say out loud. That's right, botanical flirting, high-stakes daisy-picking, and you wonder why Victorians were so tightly wound. As the walk continues, you come to a small hill with a view over the rolling fields. Your companion gestures for you to rest on a mossy stone bench that's been carefully placed here to look like it wasn't carefully placed. You sit, grateful to take the weight off your toes, and glance out across the land. Everything is green and gold, with tiny dots of sheep like moving snowflakes. Far off, you hear the faint whistle of a train, modernity encroaching on your pastoral peace. Your companion turns to you and says something earnest about the beauty of the natural world. You nod, only half listening, because your foot is asleep and the breeze is sending the scent of wild garlic directly up your nose. Still, it's a nice moment. Simple, soft, unhurried. And here's your fringe fact for today. Not all country walks were peaceful, moral affairs. Some took a turn for the slightly illicit. There were real concerns, voiced loudly by the morally panicked, that a young couple wandering too far into the hedgerows might come back engaged. Or worse, not engaged. The term walking out began to carry romantic implications, to the point where some families forbade unchaperoned walks altogether, because apparently nothing stirs the blood like a hedge maze and a slight incline. Scholars still debate the social significance of these walks. Were they acts of independence, especially for young women, or just another structured courtship ritual wrapped in rustic scenery? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. For many, these were the rare moments when conversation felt natural and boundaries could be gently tested, without the weight of piano recitals, prayer books, or family dinner looming over every word. As the sun begins its slow descent behind the hills, your companion rises and offers a gloved hand to help you up. Your foot tingles back to life with a vengeance. You wince, smile, and accept the hand. Together, you begin the walk back, this time a little slower. Not just because of the foot, but because neither of you is quite ready to return to the stiff furniture and overcooked vegetables of domestic life. The gravel crunches again underfoot. The breeze picks up. Somewhere in the hedgerow, a bird calls out, probably a blackbird, possibly a disguised spy from a local gossip circle. Either way, you pretend not to notice. By the time you reach the gate to the garden, the air smells faintly of chimney smoke and damp earth. The sun slips below the horizon with theatrical flair, casting everything in gold and violet. You pause there a moment, hand on the gate, your companion at your side, and you both say nothing. It's the best conversation of the day, and then you step back inside, back to reality, back to obligations, but with a flower tucked quietly into your pocket, just in case it meant something. The sun rises with a low coppery glow, casting long shadows across the garden and streaking the parlour windows with light so golden it could almost be warm, if the house itself weren't still as cold as a crypt. Breakfast is quiet, polite, and entirely dominated by a terrifying boiled egg. But soon after, the mood lifts and a plan is floated. The weather is fair, the lawns are mostly dry, and the gin has been quietly located. That can only mean one thing. It's time for a garden party. Now, if you're picturing something dainty, little cakes, parasols, soft piano music floating on the breeze, you're only half right. Garden parties in 1850 may be beautiful on the surface, but underneath the lace gloves and lemon drizzle cake is a battlefield of status, of flirtation, of keeping white linen from brushing against goose droppings. You get dressed accordingly. Your outfit includes no fewer than 4 layers, 2 decorative pins, a hat large enough to be visible from space, and a mild sense of dread. You step out into the sunlight, which is doing its best to warm the world, but mostly just highlights every wrinkle in your gloves. The lawn stretches before you, emerald and pristine, interrupted only by flower beds, chairs too flimsy for adult use, and a dangerously complicated setup for croquet. Guests trickle in. Some arrive early to secure good seats and better gossip. Others waft in fashionably late, pretending it's because they lost track of time, and not because they spent 45 minutes retying their cravat. You take your place near the refreshment table, which includes lemon tarts, questionable sandwiches, and a large glass pitcher of something that smells sweet and innocent, but is in fact gin disguised as fruit punch. The mingling begins. This is Victorian networking at its most aggressive. Conversations begin with pleasantries, pivot to rumours, and occasionally climax in passive-aggressive remarks about someone's hat being so charmingly unconventional. Everyone's watching everyone else, pretending not to. One woman compliments your dress while clearly trying to assess whether your hemline is slightly out of date. It is, but you wear it with confidence, which confuses her. Someone announces it's time for croquet, and there's a ripple of activity. Mallets are gathered, hoops are adjusted, and someone's dog is hastily removed from the field. You join a team reluctantly. Croquet in 1850 is the closest thing to psychological warfare available in polite society. The rules are deceptively simple. Hit the ball through the hoops, but the real game lies in the sabotage. You're allowed to knock other players' balls off course, which Victorians do with the same restraint they apply to warfare. None. Your opponent is a woman named Clara with a ruthless backspin and a smile that suggests she poisons begonias for fun. She knocks your ball into a shrubbery with alarming precision, then apologises sweetly. "Oh dear," she says, "I do hope I haven't ruined your turn." You smile and vow revenge in the next round. Here's a historical fact to tuck into your hatband. Croquet only became wildly popular in the 1850s, especially among the middle and upper classes. It was one of the few outdoor games considered respectable for women, because it didn't involve running, sweating, or yelling, which of course meant it definitely involved all three behind the guise of civility. It was also one of the rare co-ed activities where unmarried men and women could mingle with just enough physical proximity to keep things interesting. As the game winds down, you wander toward a group gathered under a willow tree where someone is reading poetry aloud. It's not terrible, it's also not good, but everyone nods sagely and pretends to understand the metaphor about bees and destiny. You sit for a while, sipping your now lukewarm gin punch, listening to the hum of conversation and the occasional bird song layered with nervous giggling. Then someone suggests lawn games for the young people, and before you know it, you're roped into a round of graces, a game involving ribbons and hoops that looks innocent but requires the reflexes of a professional fencer. You flail gracefully. A hoop hits someone's hat. There is laughter. It's one of those rare, unforced moments of joy, and you hang on to it like a secret. And now for your fringe fact. Some garden parties included fortune tellers. Not the real kind, of course. Just a local spinster in a borrowed shawl pretending to be a Romani mystic and reading palms in exchange for jam tarts. The predictions were vague but oddly specific. You will marry unless you do not. Beware a man with damp hands. Avoid Thursdays. It was all in good fun, though several guests left deeply convinced that the widow from number 4 was a witch. As the afternoon drifts on, the air grows lazier. Someone starts strumming a guitar badly. A child cries because someone stepped on her dolly's bonnet. The gin pitcher is mysteriously empty. You find a quiet corner near the rose bushes, grateful for a break from the endless parade of small talk and veiled judgment. And yet, as much as these parties are exhausting, they're also oddly enchanting. The effort, the costumes, the chaos of it all. It creates something, a shared memory, a living portrait of a world caught halfway between propriety and play. You watch as an older couple dances a slow, forgotten reel on the edge of the lawn, steps worn but tender, like they're moving through time itself. Scholars still argue whether garden parties were liberating or just another social trap. Did they allow women more freedom to move, speak and mingle, or were they just a larger drawing room with grass? Again, the answer is both. But in these open-air stages, the script loosened. The costumes got dirty. And sometimes, just sometimes, people said what they really meant. As the sun begins to dip low behind the hedgerows, lanterns are lit, and the sky turns a soft watercolour of mauve and gold. You take one last pass through the garden, saying your goodbyes, clutching a piece of cake in a napkin like a trophy from a battle only you understood. Back inside, your shoes come off with a sigh, your feet aching, your skin smelling faintly of roses and baked grass. You flop onto a settee, your hat listing dramatically to one side, and you think, yes, that was fun. A little chaotic, slightly judgmental, mildly bruising, but fun. The next morning arrives with a sense of mild regret and lingering pollen. your ankles are sore from croquet, your gloves are mysteriously grass-stained, and your hat is still full of rose petals you don't remember collecting. But before you can retreat to your room and feign illness for the day, someone bursts in with that gleam in their eye. The one that means, I've just acquired something dangerous and vaguely scientific. And just like that, you're roped into the 1850s version of recreational chaos, amateur science. Now, let's be clear. You're not off to some formal laboratory with polished brass and clever people named Archibald. No, this is someone's sitting room, or their garden shed if they're truly ambitious, converted into a makeshift lab full of glass tubes, strange powders, and at least one coil of wire that hums ominously when you get too close. Welcome to Victorian experimental science, where enthusiasm outruns understanding by several dangerous miles. Your host is thrilled. "We're building a voltaic pile," he says, which is somehow both exciting and vaguely threatening. You nod politely and scan the room for exits. On the table are metal discs, vinegar-soaked cloth, and several toads' worth of questionable ambition. He explains that, when stacked correctly, these layers can create a tiny electrical current, enough perhaps to ring a bell or electrocute a skeptical cousin. This, it turns out, is not uncommon. In 1850, electricity is the new obsession. It's still mysterious, still spooky, still dangerously underregulated. It's the stuff of parlor experiments, travelling lectures, and half-baked home devices that either light up or explode. Naturally, you're invited to participate. Your job is simple. Hold the copper disc and don't flinch. Spoiler, you flinch. There's a little jolt, a tiny blue spark, and the faint smell of vinegar and singed pride. "Marvellous," says your host, scribbling notes in a leather-bound journal titled Galvanic Fantasies. Someone claps. You wonder if this counts as a medical procedure. The room is full of gadgets in various states of danger. A clunky air pump that might suck your eyebrows off. A magnifying glass rigged to focus sunlight onto gunpowder for demonstration purposes. A jar of what is very confidently labelled pure ether, which is either a mild anaesthetic or an invitation to lose consciousness mid-experiment. No one seems too concerned. This kind of experimentation is all the rage right now. You're living in the golden age of the gentleman scientist, that awkward in-between space where science isn't quite institutional yet, and still belongs partly to hobbyists, tinkerers, and anyone with a few coins and an attic full of potentially flammable enthusiasm. You don't need a degree to be taken seriously, just a telescope, a microscope, and the ability to not blow yourself up. Probably. Someone wheels in a strange device that looks like a birdcage mated with a spinning wheel. It's a static electricity generator. "This one's a crowd pleaser," says your host. He begins to crank it, and the air suddenly fills with a dry, papery crackle of static charge. When he touches the knob at the top, a spark leaps out with a snap, and someone in the back shrieks. Whether in fear or joy is unclear. You try it next. A sharp jolt runs through your fingers and up your arm. It's oddly exhilarating. You now understand how Frankenstein's monster might have felt in his first few moments. Confused, tingly, and probably wishing someone had warned him about voltage. And here's your historical fact. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was published decades earlier, but by 1850, the idea of electricity as life-giving, or life-ending force, was deeply entrenched in both science and fiction. People weren't sure whether these experiments would lead to flying machines or undead abominations. Either way, they couldn't look away. Your host shows off his microscope next. An enormous brass contraption that could double as a cannon. You peer through the lens at a water droplet and see tiny organisms twitching like dancers at a very boring party. It's mesmerising. The idea that entire worlds exist in a teaspoon of pond water. Revolutionary. Also disgusting. Of course, no science session is complete without some chemistry. Out come the beakers, the powders, the infamously unreliable matches. Someone mixes potassium with something that sounds innocent enough, and the resulting pop singes the edge of the drapes. "Controlled reaction," says your host, fanning the smoke with a scientific pamphlet titled Chemical Amusements for the Young and the Unmarried. You edge away, trying to remember where the fire bucket was last seen. Now here's your quirky fact. There were science kits sold in the 1850s specifically for home use, marketed to children, ladies, and idle young men. They came with instructions like, Combine substances only in a ventilated area and do not inhale the fumes directly. Naturally, these were the exact things everyone did first. Scholars still debate the value of these amateur experiments. Were they meaningful contributions to public understanding of science, or just dangerous parlor tricks for bored aristocrats? Again, the answer is somewhere in the middle. While many discoveries did come from academic labs, plenty of insights, and future scientists, were born in drawing rooms filled with vinegar, static generators, and accidental chemical fires. You step outside for air. Your hair smells faintly of sulphur, and your fingertips are still buzzing. Birds chirp overhead, completely unaware that humans are in there, poking at the very fabric of nature with copper rods and wishful thinking. You watch a squirrel dig a hole and feel a strange, contented envy. He, at least, is unlikely to get electrocuted by a lemon battery. Back inside, the experiments are winding down. Someone produces a crystal that allegedly glows when held over a magnet, but mostly it just makes people pretend to see things to be polite. You accept one final cup of tea, served by someone whose apron has definitely been singed. You raise your teacup in silent salute to the courage of those who pursue knowledge with nothing but a box of chemicals and a very shaky hand. And then you leave, buzzing with static, vaguely high on ether fumes, and absolutely convinced that amateur science is equal parts genius, madness, and the finest entertainment of the age. You're barely recovered from the thrill of not being blown up by a makeshift static generator when someone proposes something new for the evening. Not a game. Not another rousing round of musical chairs followed by everyone pretending to enjoy Mrs. Godfrey's recitation of obscure moral poetry. No, tonight is something special, slightly spooky, dimly lit, and very on trend for 1850. You're going to a magic lantern show. Now, if your brain just offered up an image of a magician pulling a rabbit from a Victorian hat, reset that expectation. A magic lantern is an early projector. Imagine a box with a lens, a flame, and a stack of painted glass slides. And it's about to be the most exciting piece of entertainment you've seen since that incident with the juggling chimney sweep at the Midsummer Fete. The house chosen for the show is a bit grander than most. Big windows, high ceilings, too many tassels on the curtains. It's the kind of place where you half expect to see a parrot perched on a velvet stand. You file in with the other guests, making small talk in hushed tones like you're all attending a séance or a secret opera. The air smells of oil lamps, lavender, and that faint burnt toast tang that suggests someone overdid it with the lantern wick earlier in the day. The parlour has been transformed. Chairs are arranged in tight rows. The windows are covered with thick cloth to block out the moonlight, and at the front of the room someone is fiddling with what looks like a tiny furnace attached to a telescope. That's your showman, a friend of a friend, a gentleman with sideburns that could slice ham, and the air of someone who's explained this 100 times to people who still ask, "But how does the picture move?" He clears his throat. The lights go low. Someone coughs dramatically, and then light. A beam cuts through the darkness, warm and golden, and projects onto a white sheet tacked unconvincingly to the wall. The first image is simple, a drawing of a cat. It blinks, thanks to a clever little slide with moving parts. The room gasps. A woman whispers, "Merciful heavens," as if the cat has leapt from the screen and demanded her hand in marriage. Slide after slide appears. Some are pastoral scenes, lakes and cottages, sunsets and gentle sheep that stare just a bit too directly at the audience. Others are biblical, with dramatic angels and plenty of smiting. The images don't move much, but they glow. They shimmer with life, especially when the showman adds smoke or adjusts the lens to create a zoom effect. It's part story time, part stage play, and entirely hypnotic. You find yourself leaning forward, caught in the flicker and hum of it all. It's like dreaming with your eyes open, like being read to by candlelight with pictures summoned from the ether. And then, just when you're lulled into comfort, things get dark, literally. The next slide appears suddenly, a grim alleyway, a figure in shadow. Then another slide, a ghostly woman, arms outstretched, her eyes just a little too lifelike. The room goes still. The showman lowers his voice. He's telling a ghost story now, something about betrayal, a cursed portrait, and a vow spoken at the stroke of midnight. The ghost flickers, disappears. then reappears in a different position, closer to the front of the scene. Someone audibly gasps. The child beside you grips their mother's arm. Even you feel your pulse tighten. It's a trick of coarse, clever slide manipulation, maybe a touch of coloured glass, but in the moment, it feels real. That's the genius of the magic lantern. It feels like magic. Now here's your historical nugget for the night. Magic lanterns date back to the 17th century, but by 1850, they've evolved into sophisticated storytelling devices. Travelling lecturers use them for educational shows, astronomy lessons, geography tours, temperance warnings. Others use them to dazzle parties, raise money, or, in some cases, terrify local children with morality tales involving dancing skeletons and judgmental angels. In fact, there was an entire genre of lantern shows called phantasmagoria, which specialised in horror and illusion. Operators used multiple lanterns, sliding screens, smoke, and eerie music to conjure spirits on the walls. Victorians loved it. Nothing quite says respectable family evening like conjuring a wailing spectre in your drawing room. But of course, not everyone approved. Some moralists warned that lantern shows stirred the imagination too much. Too much light, too much illusion, too much thinking. One anonymous critic even suggested that exposure to animated biblical scenes might lead to a weakening of spiritual seriousness, to which we say, lighten up, literally. Scholars today still debate the cultural impact of magic lantern shows. Were they an early form of mass media, a precursor to cinema, or just a really elaborate way to spook your neighbours? The answer is, again, all of the above. These shows brought images to people who might never see a painting gallery or a theatre. They made stories tangible, visual, alive. Back in the room, the show is reaching its climax. The tale has turned redemptive now. The ghost forgiven, the lover returned, the cat reappearing inexplicably at the final slide for comedic relief. The lights come up slowly. The room shifts back into reality like a dream fading with dawn. People murmur appreciatively. There's polite clapping. Someone says, "I had no idea such marvels were possible." And someone else mutters, "I think the devil was in the third slide," which honestly seems like an overreaction. As you file out into the hallway, blinking against the candlelight, your mind is still full of glowing angels and shadowy figures. The night air outside feels different now, more charged. The moon overhead looks like it belongs on one of those slides, frozen and dramatic. And here's a quirky detail you'll enjoy. Some lantern showmen added sound effects, creaking doors, thunder, footsteps, using hidden props or assistants stomping behind curtains. Tonight's show didn't go quite that far, but you're already imagining future performances with howling wind machines, and maybe a live cat for authenticity. You head to your room with the hum of the lantern still in your ears, your thoughts flickering between fiction and reality. That's the thing about Victorian entertainment. It doesn't need to move quickly. It doesn't need colour or clarity or perfect realism. It just needs to glow. You wake the next morning with a lingering sense of unease. Was it the ghost slide from the magic lantern show? Or perhaps the questionable bit of smoked haddock at supper? Either way, your dreams were full of flickering images, strange laughter, and a cat that kept whispering moral lessons in Latin. Time to shake it off. After all, there's a new form of fun waiting just downstairs. One that promises thrills, chills, and at least 3 overly dramatic deaths in every chapter. It's time to dive into the world of penny dreadfuls. You head to the parlour and find a small stack of thin, colourful booklets left out on a side table. The covers are lurid, bright reds, yellows and greens, with titles like Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street, Varney the Vampire, and The Mysteries of London. Each features wide-eyed damsels, mustachioed villains, and at least one person dangling from a ledge or waving a sword at absolutely nothing. You're instantly hooked. You pick one up. The paper is rough, the print slightly smeared, but you don't care. You flip to the first page and dive in. The story begins in a foggy London alley, where a mysterious figure in a cape whispers to a stranger, "Beware the hound of midnight." There are no slow introductions, no polite pacing. Penny dreadfuls throw you straight into the action with a knife in one hand and a secret identity in the other. The prose is breathless, overwritten, gloriously unhinged. Every chapter ends with a cliffhanger. Someone's always about to be stabbed, kidnapped, or revealed to be their own long-lost twin. You cannot look away. Penny dreadfuls are the binge-worthy content of the Victorian era, serialised in cheap weekly instalments and sold for, yes, a penny. These stories are wildly popular among the working class and anyone else with a taste for the dramatic. They're fast, easy to follow, and absolutely dripping with gothic melodrama. And they're not just for boys or lowly street urchins, despite what the moralists like to claim. You, a perfectly respectable person with minimal criminal tendencies, are now on chapter 3 of The String of Pearls, and you need to know if the customer at Sweeney Todd's barbershop ever makes it out alive. Spoiler, he doesn't. He becomes a meat pie. You're strangely okay with this. As you continue reading, you become aware of the atmosphere around you. The clock ticks loudly. A floorboard creaks upstairs. The fire flickers in a way that feels just a bit too intentional. And yet you read on, because what else are you going to do? Play more parlour games with Mrs. Trumbull. Your younger cousin flops onto the rug beside you, face smudged with ink and excitement. "Is that the one with the ghost who pretends to be a chimney?" she asks. You nod solemnly. It is. She scoots closer. Reading these together becomes an event, an oral, tradition of terror. You take turns reading lines aloud in your most theatrical voices, adding shrieks and gasps for effect. The story gets worse. The story gets better. And here's your historical fact. Many penny dreadfuls were inspired by real-life crimes, urban legends, and folk tales. Some were thinly veiled versions of actual murder trials, embellished for drama. Others were pure invention, designed to make readers clutch their pearls while eagerly forking over another penny the following week. They were printed on the cheapest paper available and often illustrated with woodcuts that looked like they'd been carved by someone having a nervous breakdown. But no one cared. The point wasn't quality, it was sensation. The upper classes predictably panicked. Moral reformers warned that penny dreadfuls would corrupt the youth, inspire crime, and rot the intellect. Pamphlets were distributed. Fireside sermons were delivered. One particularly dramatic headline in 1850 declared, "These tales of blood will be the end of civilization." Meanwhile, sales doubled. That brings us to your quirky fringe fact. Some children actually acted out their favourite dreadfuls in back alleys and schoolyards. They formed secret clubs with names like the Midnight Stabbers, or the League of the Accursed Grave. They spoke in hushed, ridiculous accents and made fake swords out of fireplace pokers. Several were chased off by nannies wielding umbrellas, and one local magistrate tried to outlaw dramatic sighing in public parks. You and your cousin decide to try your own dramatic reading after supper. You gather a small audience in the drawing room, just a few other cousins and one alarmed but curious aunt. You light the room with a single lamp for effect. Then, with a solemnity normally reserved for funerals or overcooked lamb, you begin. Chapter 6. The Bloodstained Razor. The performance is a lot. Your cousin screams at every opportunity. You dramatically collapse to the floor at the mention of betrayal. At one point, someone knocks over a side table while pretending to duel an invisible villain, and a tea set meets its untimely end. Aunt Judith says it's utterly tasteless, but also asks if you have the next instalment. Scholars today argue about the value of penny dreadfuls. Were they lowbrow pulp meant to distract the masses from their problems? Or were they vital cultural artefacts that gave voice to the fears, hopes, and chaotic imaginations of an increasingly urbanised society? The answer, like most things Victorian, is somewhere between horror and hilarity. As the evening ends, you fold your dreadful back into its original creased shape and tuck it into your pocket like a forbidden treasure. Tomorrow, you'll trade it with someone for a different one. Maybe Spring-Heeled Jack or The Curse of the Crimson Eye. Something equally absurd, equally wonderful. You head to bed, your mind filled with shadowy alleys, sinister, whispers, and melodramatic revenge plots that will never resolve sensibly. You fall asleep with a faint smile and the firm belief that no matter how grim real life gets, there's always room for a story where someone is both a duke, a pirate, and a werewolf. Possibly all at once. After the sensory overload of meat pie murders, gas lamp ghosts, and your cousin's theatrical death scene that somehow involved jelly, you wake feeling the need to rebalance your inner Victorian. It's time to restore a little dignity or at least pretend to, today's leisure is calm, creative, and considerably less blood-spattered. You're going to sketch, or paint, or watercolour if you're feeling bold. Either way, it's time to tap into your delicate, well-mannered inner artist, even if your only muse is a dead squirrel. The art supplies are already waiting in the morning room, a cheerful little chamber with big windows and too many chairs upholstered in aggressively floral prints. On a small table near the window is a stack of crisp paper, a tin of graphite pencils, and a little metal paint box with dried cakes of colour that look like someone's failed attempt at candy. You choose your weapon, a pencil with a delightfully sharpened tip and just the right amount of pretension. Outside, the garden is glowing with soft morning light. Bees fumble around the roses. A bird you can't identify is making a sound like a squeaky hinge. And in the middle of the gravel path lies a small, unmoving shape. Upon closer inspection, it's a bird, possibly dead, possibly asleep, possibly judging you. Either way, it's your subject now. You set up your sketchbook with the seriousness of someone about to invent impressionism. The pencil glides across the paper. Sort of. There's a lot of erasing. At one point you accidentally give the bird a second head, and then try to turn it into a tail. It doesn't help. Still, the act of looking, really looking, feels good. Grounding. You notice how the feathers shift in the breeze, how the shadow falls under the wing, how the eye, disturbingly glassy, still somehow makes you feel guilty for being bad at symmetry. This isn't just about art, it's about observation. In 1850, sketching is considered a respectable, even essential pastime, especially for women. It teaches patience, discipline, and above all, quietness. A lady with a pencil is a lady who's too busy to gossip or run away with the stable boy. It's practically a safety measure. But let's be honest, art also provides a rare window into you, your tastes, your perspective, your obsessions. Some people draw landscapes, others draw still lifes. You once met someone who filled an entire sketchbook with nothing but clouds and suspiciously well-shaped biceps. You don't judge. Once you're reasonably satisfied with your dead bird masterpiece, you title it Melancholy Finch in Morning Stillness for added drama. You decide to move indoors and try your hand at watercolours. The supplies here are even fussier. Porcelain mixing trays, tiny brushes made from hair plucked from innocent squirrels, and colours with names like Madder Lake, Viridian, and Vague Regret. You choose a simpler subject this time, the view from the parlour window, a vase of wilting flowers, the corner of a cracked mirror, the curtain that never hangs quite straight. It's less flashy than your bird, but somehow more emotional. You paint in slow strokes, layering colour, letting the water bleed and swirl like a polite rebellion. There's something satisfying about it, something secret. Here's your historical fact. Sketching and painting were not only fashionable in Victorian leisure culture, they were often considered proof of refinement. People carried sketchbooks the way we carry phones. Artists would bring them on walks, picnics, even to funerals, though hopefully not for portraits. Some homes had entire rooms dedicated to amateur art. Little studios filled with unfinished canvases, broken easels, and the occasional ceramic bust that looked just a bit too judgmental. But of course, not everyone viewed it as pure pleasure. For some, art was a performance, a way to show off breeding and gentility. Your watercolours were expected to be tasteful, no garish colours, no overly dramatic lighting, and definitely no nudes. Heaven forbid your daffodils looked sensual. Still, for many Victorians, drawing was deeply personal, a way to process feelings otherwise trapped under 10 layers of propriety, a kind of silent diary in graphite and pigment. And now for your quirky fringe fact. Some Victorians were obsessed with sketching fossils, not just because they were fascinated by natural history, but because it allowed them to draw things that were technically educational, while still being just a little creepy. There were entire sketch clubs devoted to drawing shells, bones, and prehistoric monsters, often with wildly inaccurate results. One famous amateur once drew a plesiosaur with 6 legs and a moustache. No one corrected him. You hear a sound behind you. Your cousin, again, looking over your shoulder. She squints at your watercolour and says, "Is it supposed to be sad?" You say, "Yes." She says, "Good," and wanders off. You decide to take that as high praise. Later in the afternoon, someone suggests a game of art critics. where everyone displays their sketches anonymously, and the group tries to guess who made what, followed by mildly offensive commentary, disguised as compliments. You participate with a mixture of pride and dread. When your bird is revealed, someone gasps and says, "So hauntingly lifeless." Another adds, "I could swear it's staring at me." You've never felt more accomplished. There's scholarly debate about whether Victorian sketching was truly artistic expression, or just another tool of social conditioning. Were these young artists finding their voice, or were they being trained to express only what was safe, palatable, and properly framed? As usual, it's a bit of both. But in the small rebellions, drawing something odd, choosing an unexpected colour, leaving a face half-finished, there's freedom. The quiet kind. The kind you only see if you're looking closely. By the end of the day, your hands are smudged with graphite, your sleeves dotted with watercolour, and your sketchbook filled with things that don't look quite right but feel very real. You stack your papers carefully, tuck your supplies away, and take one last look at your strange, blotchy bird. It's not perfect. But then again, neither is life. The house is unusually noisy tonight. Not rowdy, just full. Doors creak, footsteps echo down the corridors, and someone upstairs keeps practicing their French verbs out loud with the enthusiasm of a drunk ghost. After a long day spent sketching deceased wildlife and defending your artistic choices, you're ready for something a little more collaborative, something sociable, something with less existential dread and more harmonised warbling, which means tonight you'll be participating in the beloved Victorian pastime of music night at home. Now let's be honest from the outset. This isn't grab your guitar and sing by the campfire casual. This is structured music, planned, curated, performed in a parlour stuffed with people who may or may not clap politely at the end. If you're lucky, it'll be fun. If you're not, Cousin Edith will sing again, and none of us are ready for that. The furniture has been rearranged into a sort of semicircle, as if preparing for an elegant duel. In the corner stands the centrepiece of the night, a gleaming upright piano. It's been freshly polished and emits a slight lemony scent, possibly to disguise the smell of anxiety. A stack of sheet music rests nearby, leaning slightly to the side, suggesting someone has attempted to learn all of it, and succeeded at exactly none. Guests filter in, dressed not too formally but with just enough extra starch to say, "Yes, I'll pretend to enjoy this." You take a seat with a view of the piano and a quick escape route just in case things go south. A fire crackles softly in the grate. Someone passes around wine. The atmosphere is 1 part salon, 2 parts silent judgment. First up, a piano solo, performed by a young man with dramatic hair and the posture of a worried heron. He plays a polonaise by Chopin, or possibly just mashes the keys until something melodic happens. Either way, it's loud. Everyone nods encouragingly. A few people close their eyes, not in rapture, but in self-defense. Then comes a duet, 2 sisters who have practiced together for weeks, and still somehow manage to harmonise like 2 geese bickering over stale bread. Their mother beams proudly from the corner. You sip your drink and hope your turn comes later, when expectations are lower and most people have already moved on to the port. Your own contribution is modest, a ballad, performed with cautious enthusiasm. You open your mouth, hit a surprisingly good first note, and immediately forget every lyric you've ever known. Thankfully, the sheet music is within reach. The song tells a story of lost love, a stormy coast, and a vow made at twilight. You lean into the drama. If nothing else, you'll be remembered as the person who tried. Someone applauds a bit too loudly at the end, which feels both supportive and sarcastic. You take a bow anyway. Here's your historical fact for the evening. In 1850, home music making was not just common, it was expected. The middle and upper classes saw it as a moral and cultural duty. Playing the piano, especially for women, was a sign of refinement, discipline, and charm. A lady who couldn't play was seen as incomplete, which is ironic, considering most of them hated it and just wanted to go sit quietly by a tree. Music books sold briskly, and every well-off home had a piano or harmonium tucked into a corner, waiting to be played, dusted, or ignored. Popular pieces included ballads, light opera selections, and sentimental songs with names like The Willow Maid's Farewell and The Dying Cuckoo. It was all very dramatic, very earnest, and almost impossible to get out of once someone asked, "Won't you play something for us?" One of the cousins, no one's sure which one exactly, has brought a flute. He performs an instrumental solo with a seriousness that suggests war crimes will be committed if anyone talks during the performance. The pieces are tonal, long, and best appreciated from several rooms away. You smile through it, thinking about that exact moment when too much art becomes an act of passive aggression. Now for your quirky fringe fact. Musical charades were occasionally part of Victorian evenings. This involved miming a musical piece or composing silly verses to known tunes, often with lyrics rewritten to describe dinner guests or current events. One infamous party in 1849 ended with a spontaneous operetta about the vicar's missing umbrella, performed by 4 mildly intoxicated bankers. It became legendary. The umbrella was never found. Back in your parlour, the evening continues with a surprisingly strong performance by a quiet aunt no one knew could sing. She delivers a Scottish folk tune with a voice like weathered silk, and the room goes still. For a moment, everyone forgets they're in a room full of overstuffed chairs and half-empty glasses. For a moment, it's real. But the silence doesn't last long. Enter Cousin Edith. She steps forward with the confidence of someone who's been waiting all night to shine. Her chosen piece, a German aria no one recognises but everyone knows is going to be too long, she starts. It's not bad, not exactly, but it's very loud and very sharp, and full of that kind of high note that feels like being threatened by a crystal goblet. You survive it. Barely. Someone suggests wrapping up the evening with a sing-along. The group lurches into a rendition of Home Sweet Home, only slightly out of key. Arms linked, voices blending, some strong, some cracking. It becomes a kind of communal spell. Imperfect. Warm. Human. There's scholarly debate about whether music nights were empowering or oppressive, particularly for women, who were expected to perform flawlessly and modestly at the same time. Was it an outlet for creativity, or another way to evaluate marriage prospects based on finger dexterity and vocal control? Again, probably both. But many did genuinely love it. The shared experience, the emotional release, the rare chance to feel in public without needing an excuse. As the final note fades, the candles flicker low. People smile, tired smiles. Someone yawns dramatically. You gather your music sheets, unsure if you've embarrassed yourself or discovered a hidden talent. Either way you participated, you survived, you sang. And you didn't throw anything at Edith, a triumph by any measure. The night brought frost. You know because the window panes in your room were painted silver when you woke, delicate white veins curling across the glass like nature's attempt at wallpaper. The chamber pot was frozen. Your boots felt like they'd been carved from ice. It is, unmistakably, winter in 1850, which means everything you wear now crinkles when you move and your breath looks like smoke. But it also means something wonderful. It's finally time for ice skating, sledding, and that particular brand of Victorian winter chaos that somehow counts as fun. You bundle yourself in approximately 17 layers, none of which are remotely waterproof. Your scarf scratches, your wool gloves make your fingers feel like sausages, and your boots were definitely not designed for traction. Still, there's excitement in the air. People bustle about with purpose. The skies are bright, cloudless blue, and someone just rushed past carrying a tray of hot chestnuts and screaming, "Bring the long sled! We're using the hill behind the stables!" You follow the sounds of screaming and laughter down a path to the frozen pond, where a crowd has gathered. It looks like something out of a painting, if the artist had a sense of humour, and included at least 3 people falling at any given moment. The ice sparkles in the sun. People of all ages are attempting to skate with varying levels of grace, or at least dignity. A child glides past effortlessly, hands behind his back like a tiny duke. An adult woman, not so lucky, spins once and lands in a very dramatic puddle of skirt. Skating in 1850 isn't just a sport, it's a display. Especially if you're unmarried and hoping to impress someone with your balance, poise, or ability to fall endearingly. You lace up a pair of borrowed skates that may or may not be cursed. They look like medieval torture devices, but are, according to your cousin, just broken in. You step onto the ice and immediately rethink your entire life. For the first 5 minutes, you resemble a giraffe trying to tap dance on an oiled floor. Your arms flail, your knees wobble, and your internal monologue sounds like, "Don't fall, don't fall. Why is that goose on the ice? Oh no!" But then slowly your body begins to adapt. You find a rhythm. The wind brushes your cheeks. Your scarf trails behind you like a heroic cape. You almost smile. You might be doing it. And then you're hit by a sled. To be fair, you never saw it coming. One moment you're cruising gently near the bank, and the next a wooden missile with two gleeful children aboard barrels toward you. With the speed of divine judgment, you lurch sideways, arms flapping, and land in a heap of snow, laughter, and mild existential despair. "Sorry," one child yells cheerfully, as they disappear across the pond. You lay there, limbs askew, staring at the bright blue sky and rethinking your stance on indoor games. But after a moment you laugh, because of course you got hit by a sled. That's winter's way of saying hello. Here's your historical fact. In the mid-19th century, ice skating became wildly fashionable, thanks in part to Queen Victoria herself. She and Prince Albert were known to skate together. Romantic, elegant, and possibly a bit dangerous, given the stiff formal wear. It inspired a national craze. Gentlemen practiced figures. Ladies glided gracefully while pretending not to freeze, and entire rivers were taken over by weekend skaters, hoping to show off or just survive. Meanwhile, sledding, or sledging, if you wanted to sound properly Victorian, was less formal, more chaotic. Hills became arenas, children built ramps, adults joined in with the kind of reckless joy usually reserved for their youth or secret gin bottles. The sleds range from sensible wood and metal designs to repurposed furniture. One local legend tells of a group using a church pew, which ended in broken ankles and stern lectures from the vicar. And here's your quirky fringe fact. During particularly cold winters, the Thames would freeze, and impromptu frost fairs would spring up right on the ice. People set up booths, played games, even walked elephants across the frozen river for entertainment. Yes, elephants. The last official frost fair happened in 1814, but by 1850, everyone still talked about it like they'd been there, even if they were 5 years old and mostly remembered the boiled sweets. Back on the ice, you've recovered. You do a few more tentative laps, only falling once, and then retire to the sledding hill, where things are considerably more rowdy. A line has formed, and people are being launched down the slope with terrifying enthusiasm. You watch someone in a fur-lined cloak go down backwards while reciting poetry. At the bottom, they crash into a hay bale and shout, "That was transcendent!" You wait your turn. When it comes, you hop aboard the sled with a small child who seems to believe he's steering. "Hold on," he yells, even though he's clearly doing no such thing. The sled takes off like a shot. Snow flies. Trees blur. Someone screams. It might be you. The ride is equal parts joy and terror. At the bottom, you land in a heap of snow and glory, and someone hands you a hot cup of spiced cider like you've just returned from war. There's a kind of magic in winter fun, an unbuttoning of formality, a rare burst of laughter from people usually too stiff to smile for more than 4 seconds. The snow makes everyone equal. Everyone falls, everyone flails, everyone gets snow down their collar and pretends they're fine. There's scholarly debate, of course, about how accessible winter leisure was in 1850. Wealthier families had private ponds and imported skates. Poorer communities improvised. But the desire was the same, to play. Even in a society obsessed with rules, winter made room for mischief, for competition, for joy. As the sun starts to sink, casting long golden rays over the snow-covered fields, people begin to pack up. Skates come off, sleds are dragged home, scarves are unwound, your cheeks are numb, your toes have vanished, but your heart is oddly full. You make your way inside, shedding layers like a molting bird. The smell of a hot soup and roasted chestnuts hits you like a blanket. Someone's already recounting the day's best falls and worst sled collisions. You sink into a chair, cider in hand, and grin as your cousin dramatically describes being chased by a goose she claims was possessed by the spirit of Napoleon. Outside, the frost begins to reassert itself. The pond goes still. The sledding hill is marked only by tracks and the occasional lost mitten, and the house, warm and flickering, echoes with laughter, the kind that only comes after risking your life for fun in 5 layers of wool. The winter fun may have left you with a bruised hip and a suspiciously rattly cough, but you've survived. Barely. Today, however, you're promised something with less risk of concussion. A quiet afternoon of board games. Ah, yes, the refined domestic form of entertainment where you sit politely around a table, move tokens across printed maps, and pretend not to resent your loved ones as they beat you at a game designed to promote virtue. You're shown into the drawing room, where a table has been cleared and a few wooden boxes are stacked beside a large brass lamp. The boxes are labelled in careful cursive: The Game of the Goose, The Mansion of Happiness, and Virtue. Rewarded: a moral adventure for young ladies. You're already exhausted, and the games haven't even started. You pick up The Mansion of Happiness, which sounds promising until you read the subtitle: An instructive moral and entertaining amusement. That's not even trying to disguise the judgment. The board is simple: spiralling spaces leading to a final square labelled happiness, which you may or may not achieve depending on your ability to avoid sins like pride, disobedience, or indulging in too much punch. You roll a die, though some games still use a teetotum, a spinning top that's apparently there to protect children from gambling addiction, and move your little ivory token along the path. You land on sobriety and get to jump ahead 2 spaces. Your cousin lands on idleness and is sent directly back to start. He throws his token across the room and storms out. You're told this is a common response to moral reflection. These moral board games were everywhere in 1850. They weren't just entertainment, they were instruction. A way for parents to reinforce good behaviour through play. The message was clear: life is a linear progression of choices, and every good deed inches you closer to eternal happiness. Every bad one, back to the beginning. Or, in some variations, straight to hell. No pressure. You move on to Virtue Rewarded, which is similar but more focused on the female experience. The goal is to reach the parlor of contentment by accumulating tokens of modesty, cleanliness, and diligence. Land on a space like Sue's with grace, and you gain a charm. Land on giggles in mixed company, and you're banished to the cellar of regret. It's less a game and more a crash course in behavioural conditioning. Your younger cousin suggests The Game of the Goose instead, a classic. It's older, less judgmental, and mostly just about moving along a spiral and trying not to land on spaces marked death or the maze of confusion. You agree, at least death is a neutral mechanic. As you play, the room slowly fills with light conversation and the clinking of teacups. The fire crackles nearby. Someone in the corner is knitting aggressively. The game progresses, and your token sails through spaces like the Fountain of Truth and the Pit of Repetition. You're not entirely sure what any of it means, but you've somehow become invested. That's the trick with board games. They lull you in with rules, and then bam, it's an hour later, and you're 1 point away from moral superiority. Here's your historical fact. Many of these games were imported from or inspired by similar ones in America and Germany. They were created not just for fun, but as tools to instill proper values, especially among children. Some were themed around religion, others around history or colonial expansion. Race to the Gold Fields was a particular favourite, in which players competed to strike it rich or die of dysentery. Fun for the whole family. The art on these games is often beautiful: hand-coloured lithographs, elaborate symbols, and that glorious Victorian lettering that makes even Cholera Square look like a wedding invitation. Some boards are mounted on linen, rolled up like treasure maps, and carried around as a portable virtue delivery device. Now for your quirky fringe fact. Certain adult board games existed in secret. Yes, really. Behind the upright facades of family amusements, there were whispered stories of parlour games with less than moral objectives. A few underground examples included games of flirtation, drinking, or light gambling. Games like the courtship ladder, where tokens represented romantic progress, and one bad spin could leave you publicly disgraced, or entangled in scandal. These were usually played late at night, away from judgmental aunts and clergymen. Back in your room, things have taken a turn. Your cousin has declared himself the virtue champion of the afternoon, and is now fashioning a crown out of knitting scraps. Someone else is trying to draw a new version of the Mansion of Happiness, where one can advance by cynicism, being left alone, and drinking discreetly behind the azaleas. You suspect it'll be a bestseller. The game eventually winds down, as all things do, with a messy pile of tokens, laughter, and one quietly burning rulebook in the fireplace. No one truly won. No one truly learned. But you've had a surprisingly good time anyway. There's scholarly debate about whether these games actually succeeded in teaching morality, or if players just memorised the good squares to avoid embarrassment. Did these amusements reinforce social values, or subtly provoke rebellion against them? It's hard to say. But there's something charming about the idea that even in a world full of rules, people still found ways to cheat the system, or at least poke fun at it. As the table is cleared and the players disperse, some to nap, others to grumble about rigged virtue mechanics, you gather the game boards and carefully tuck them back into their boxes. Despite the heavy-handed themes, they've provided something rare and precious. Togetherness, laughter, a break from the constant march of etiquette and expectation. You return to your room, a little lighter than when you left it, and place your ivory token on the mantel as a tiny trophy. Let it serve as a reminder. Morality may be a game, but fun is always the goal. Just when you thought things couldn't get more bizarre than a moral board game where your downfall is eating cake on a Tuesday, a flyer appears. It's slipped under the door like a secret, printed in smudgy ink, and scented faintly of grease paint and desperation. It reads, Wortley and Finch's Extraordinary Travelling Circus, one night only. That's right. Tonight you're going to the circus. You're not sure what to expect. Aside from the possibility of mild danger, a man in stilts, and at least one animal that should absolutely not be in a public space. But it's 1850, and when the circus rolls into town, you go. Everyone goes. From the poorest child with a copper coin in their fist to the wealthiest landowner pretending to be above it all while quietly reserving a front row seat. The tent rises like a cathedral of chaos on the edge of the village green, stitched from mismatched canvas panels that ripple dramatically in the evening breeze. It looks both majestic and slightly haunted. The air smells of sawdust, animal fur, fried onions, and the kind of sugary confections that cause immediate tooth regret. You arrive just before dusk, ticket clutched tightly in your glove. The crowd is thick, men in work boots, women in bonnets, children with faces already sticky from candy they weren't supposed to eat yet. Music blares from a nearby bandstand, something vaguely martial, full of trumpets and drums. It's part announcement, part warning. Inside this tent, things will happen. You step through the flaps and into a world that smells aggressively of hay and possibility. Lanterns hang from every pole, casting flickering shadows. The seating is crude. Planks on barrels, the occasional cushion if you know someone or brought one yourself. The ring in the centre is small, muddy, and alive with energy. People are already leaning forward, whispering, jostling, waiting. The show begins with a flourish. The ringmaster enters, top hat tilted just so, voice like thunder wrapped in velvet. Ladies and gentlemen, children and curiosities, prepare to witness wonders unlike anything you've seen before. The lights dim, the crowd hushes, a drum roll starts, as does your slow realization that you're about to see something ridiculous, possibly illegal, and very, very fun. First up, the acrobats. A family of 4 with matching red and gold outfits, and an impossible disregard for gravity. They twirl through the air on ropes, swing across the ring in synchronized arcs, and form human pyramids with alarming speed. One of them balances on a ladder held only by his sister's shoulders, which tremble slightly under the strain. You clutch your seat and wonder when they last ate something solid. Then, the trained animals. A small bear in a waistcoat rides a tiny bicycle in a perfect circle, looking both proud and deeply confused. A troop of dogs in bonnets plays leapfrog. A monkey, clearly the diva of the bunch, performs a dramatic reenactment of Julius Caesar, stabbing a stuffed lion with a wooden sword to rapturous applause. And then, of course, there are the clowns. These are not your jolly party clowns of modern nightmares. Victorian clowns are something else entirely, equal parts hilarious and unnerving. Their faces are painted white with exaggerated expressions, and their acts often involve slapstick routines with undercurrents of real pain. One smacks another with a frying pan. Another pretends to cry while stuffing his oversized shoes with straw. The audience laughs. but there's a weird melancholy to it, as if everyone's in on some joke they don't fully understand. Here's your historical fact for the night. Travelling circuses in the mid-19th century were exploding in popularity. They toured the countryside, performing in small towns and big cities alike, bringing exotic animals, daring stunts, and a rare taste of spectacle to people who might otherwise never leave. Their villages. Some troops had hundreds of members, multiple tents, and entire caravans of wagons filled with props, costumes, and general chaos. And here's your fringe fact. One of the earliest balloon acts performed in Britain involved a man ascending into the air while playing a trumpet, releasing doves from his sleeves, and then parachuting down using what was essentially a bedsheet. He broke both legs. The audience gave him a standing ovation. Back in the ring, the show continues. A strongman appears, wearing a leopard print leotard and lifting things no one asked him to lift. A barrel, a table, and finally, a small horse. Though some suspect it's just a large dog wearing hooves. He bows deeply. His moustache twitches with pride. The final act is a fire dancer. A woman in silver who twirls flaming batons while spinning in circles so fast the crowd goes completely silent. Her skirt catches once slightly, but she stomps it out without breaking rhythm. When she bows, embers still glow at her feet. You wonder who she is when she's not holding fire. A laundress, a runaway, a countess in hiding. The circus is full of people who might have been anything, and that's part of the thrill. In a world of rules and routines, the circus is wild, unpredictable. It doesn't ask you to behave. It asks you to look, to gasp, to believe, even for a moment, that something impossible is possible. It's a kind of freedom disguised as nonsense. There's scholarly debate, of course, about the ethics behind it. Animals were often poorly treated, performers worked grueling hours for little pay, and human auditors, those with physical differences, were exploited as sideshow acts under cruel names. Some historians view the circus as a dark mirror of Victorian society, where fascination and prejudice danced uncomfortably close together. Others argue it was a haven for the misfit, the daring, the too loud and too bright. A place where rules bent and strange became beautiful. Both are probably true. The show ends with a deafening round of applause. People rise to their feet. Coins are thrown. Flowers too. A few children are still wide-eyed with sugar and wonder. You walk out into the night, hearts still beating to the rhythm of drums and cartwheels. The sky is clear. The stars feel closer, as if they too had front row seats. Behind you, the tent stands tall against the moonlight, canvas rippling like it's breathing. Tomorrow it'll be gone, packed up and rolling to the next village, the next field, the next group of unsuspecting spectators who just wanted a quiet evening and ended up nearly trampled by a fire-juggling goat. You wrap your shawl tighter, your boots crunching through the frost, and smile to yourself. Fun, you realise, doesn't have to make sense. Sometimes it just needs a tent and a bear on a bicycle. You're still riding the high from last night's circus, your mind spinning with images of twirling fire, barking dogs in bonnets, and that one clown who might have been crying for real, when someone suggests you accompany them to the fairgrounds. Not a formal invitation, mind you. Just a cheerful shout of, "Come on, they've got toffee apples and a man who swallows swords." That's more than enough reason. You grab your cloak, lace your boots, and brace yourself for the glorious, unpredictable mayhem of a Victorian fair, complete with freak shows and fortune-tellers. The fairground is just beyond the town square, sprawling across a muddy field like a pop-up dreamscape, or nightmare, depending on your view of dancing pigs and suspicious meat pies. From a distance, it's a riot of colour and sound. Banners flap in the breeze, barrel organs wheeze out catchy, slightly haunted tunes. Laughter mixes with screams, and the air smells like roasted chestnuts, wet hay, spilled gin, and cheap perfume. As you arrive, you're instantly swept into the current of people, locals and visitors alike, all wrapped in shawls, scarves, and the same giddy anticipation. This isn't a neat, polite sort of event. It's chaotic. Children dart between legs. Vendors shout over one another. A man with questionable teeth tries to sell you something called wandering liver tonic, which he swears cures melancholy, indigestion, and spiritual unrest. You politely decline. The fair is divided into rough sections. The main thoroughfare is lined with food stalls, each more dubious than the last. You buy a toffee apple from a woman with no eyebrows and a heartwarming sneer. It's sticky, rock hard, and possibly capable of cracking teeth, but you feel festive just holding it. Beside you, someone's arguing with a pie vendor about whether the mystery meat might, in fact, be seagull. The vendor just winks and says, "Bird's bird, innit?" You move on, dodging a boy with a live duck under his arm and a woman balancing a tray of roasted eels. In the centre of the grounds, you find the games, throwing hoops, smashing crockery, trying to fish rubbery ducks out of a barrel with a stick shaped like moral disappointment. You win nothing, of course. The games are designed to take your coins and your pride. But the laughter is genuine, and no one really seems to care that the prizes are all crooked dolls and jars of pickled eggs. Then, over the din, you hear a voice calling, "Come one, come all, witness the extraordinary, the deformed, the divine." It can only mean one thing. The freak show is about to begin. Now, before you even approach, you're conflicted. You've heard the stories. You know the spectacle isn't kind. But you also know that in 1850, freak shows are big business. An irresistible blend of awe, discomfort, and thinly disguised fear masquerading as fascination. You join the small crowd outside a striped tent. Painted signs show the promised wonders. The bearded lady, the skeleton man, the lizard-skinned boy, and most mysteriously the Fiji queen, who is either a real person or just a woman with a papier-mâché crown and very good posture. For a penny, you're let inside. The tent is warm, stuffy, and dim. You stand shoulder to shoulder with other gawkers, some trying to appear curious, others too enchanted to hide it. One by one, the performers come forward. The bearded lady sings a song in a voice deeper than yours. The skeleton man poses dramatically, his ribs casting strange shadows. A young boy with unusual skin performs simple tricks while his handler explains the rare tropical condition he allegedly developed after being struck by lightning on the equator. None of it's true. Or maybe some of it is. You can't tell. And that's the thing about Victorian freak shows. The truth doesn't matter. It's the story that sells, the suggestion of the strange, the thrill of the grotesque. Some of the performers are clearly uncomfortable, others clearly in control. A few seem to revel in their roles, playing the crowd as much as the showman does. But underneath it all, you feel a sense of unease, of guilt. Here's your historical fact. While many of these shows were exploitative, parading people with disabilities or differences for the amusement of normal crowds, some performers became celebrities in their own right. They negotiated contracts, managed their own image, and earned more than the average worker. Still, the ethics are murky. Today, historians debate whether the freak show was empowering, dehumanizing, or both at once. You leave the tent feeling odd, a little hollow. So, naturally, you head straight for the fortune teller. Her tent is smaller, darker. It smells of incense, damp wool, and a hint of brandy. She's seated behind a lace-covered table, draped in layers of fabric that seem to shift with her every movement. Her eyes are sharp, too sharp. She gestures for you to sit. You oblige. She takes your palm and studies it with a seriousness that borders on theatrical. "You've had a recent change," she says. "Something shifted, a new energy around you." You nod. That's vague enough to be accurate. She continues, weaving a narrative out of the lines on your hand, the set of your jaw, the tremble of your left pinky finger. "There's a fork in your path," she says. "One leads to comfort, the other to adventure." You smile. Everyone always wants to be the one who chooses adventure. But comfort sounds nice too. She doesn't push. She lets you sit in the silence, imagining possibilities. Her tent, her voice, her glittering bangles, they don't give you answers. They give you permission to imagine. And here's your fringe fact. Victorian fortune tellers often relied on a combination of real intuition, clever observation, and old theatrical tricks. Some even used early cold reading techniques, picking up on body language and subtle cues to appear eerily accurate. They weren't witches. They were performers, psychologists in velvet skirts. You leave, the tent feeling lighter. Not because you believe her, necessarily, but because someone looked at you and saw possibility. In a world of rigid roles and narrow paths, that's enough. As the fair winds down, lanterns are lit, casting warm puddles of light across the muddy grass. People begin to drift away, pockets lighter, faces flushed. You head home with a bag of roasted almonds, a faint ache in your feet, and the memory of a skeleton man bowing like royalty. Behind you, the fair pulses with one last burst of laughter before fading into the night. You wake up with the unmistakable throb of too many roasted almonds, and just enough existential dread to know it's time for a change of pace. The fair, the freak show, the fortune teller, they've all left your nerves just a bit overfried. You need something structured, something grounding, something where people yell politely and no one juggles fire near your head. And so, on this blustery afternoon, you're off to participate in, or more realistically, spectate from a safe distance, Victorian sports, cricket, croquet, and the occasional death by heat stroke in lawn attire incident. The garden is already buzzing when you step outside. There's a mild wind, just enough to toy with your bonnet ribbons, and a crispness in the air that promises sunshine but threatens rain. Welcome to the British Isles. The weather is only ever a suggestion. You follow the voices toward the manicured lawn where an ambitious cousin has laid out a cricket pitch using chalk, string, and the remnants of a broken garden fence. It looks official enough. Everyone's dressed in active wear, which is to say, slightly shorter jackets, slightly lighter fabrics, and absolutely no decrease in formality. This is sport, yes, but it is still 1850, and one mustn't look underdressed, even when actively sweating into one's starched collar. Cricket begins. You sit on a blanket at the edge of the field, sipping lukewarm lemonade and pretending to understand the rules. A bat swings. A ball arcs. Someone shouts, "How's that?" and everyone freezes like a murder just occurred. A brief, whispered discussion ensues. No one seems entirely sure what happened, but eventually someone is declared out and life resumes. You ask what "how's that" means. No one really knows. It's just said. A cricket incantation. Here's your historical fact. By 1850, cricket is considered the sport of gentlemen. It's played at elite schools, in sprawling estates, and on town greens, often accompanied by much polite clapping and competitive humility. It's not a fast sport. Matches can stretch over days. Days. Players are expected to maintain decorum, regardless of whether they're winning or being completely humiliated by a 12-year-old with terrifying aim. As the match continues, or possibly ends, it's hard to tell, attention shifts to the more accessible, more chaotic sibling of Victorian leisure, croquet. The field is quickly converted. Hoops hammered into the ground, mallets passed around like sacred relics, the rules explained, twice, because no one listens the first time. The game begins with deceptive calm. Croquet on the surface seems innocent, gentle, refined. You knock a ball through a hoop, you move to the next. How civilized. Until someone lands on your space and roquets your ball into the shrubbery with the cold fury of a Victorian villain. Then it's war. Your turn comes. You approach your ball, grip your mallet with too much tension, and tap with what you believe is grace. It goes exactly 3 inches. The group offers encouraging noises. You try again. Better. You make it through the first hoop and are momentarily drunk on power. That feeling lasts exactly 1 turn, until Clara, your quietly competitive cousin, strategically angles her mallet, knocks your ball halfway to Scotland, and apologises with a smile so brittle it could cut glass. And here's your fringe fact. Croquet was the mixed-gender sport of the 19th century, and not just for the obvious reasons. Yes, it allowed men and women to play side by side, even flirt, under the guise of strategy. But it also became a kind of microcosm for courtship drama. Secret alliances, hidden rivalries. Entire relationships were rumoured to rise and fall depending on how someone wielded a mallet. An 1851 etiquette guide even warned that impropriety may bloom in the shadow of the wicket if players are not observed. Of course, the very idea of women playing sports was still controversial. Some critics argued that too much physical activity was unladylike and could lead to hysteria, or worse, excessive independence. Others insisted that light outdoor games were wholesome, particularly if they involved standing still and not speaking too forcefully. Croquet, with its controlled movement and inherent sense of fairness, was deemed acceptable, so long as no one got too good at it. Back on the field, things are escalating. Someone's ball is stuck behind a gnome. A different cousin is trying to cheat discreetly by accidentally kicking their ball forward with their heel. There's bickering, laughing, and one dramatic storming off when a mallet head flies off and nearly decapitates a garden statue of Queen Victoria. It's glorious. You lose badly, spectacularly. But you're awarded a consolation ribbon for most spirited effort, which is Victorian for nice try, dear. You wear it proudly. It matches your general energy. As everyone collapses into the grass for post-match refreshments, a debate erupts over which sport is more noble. Cricket, with its long traditions, white uniforms, and ability to bore you into another dimension, or croquet, with its cutthroat charm and potential for social sabotage. There's scholarly debate too. Some historians argue these sports were a tool for reinforcing class structure. After all, you needed space, equipment, and time, not exactly accessible to everyone. Others see them as the beginning of broader recreational trends, where leisure began to include movement, not just parlour-based dignity. Still, for a society so obsessed with self-control, sports offered a rare outlet, a way to channel frustration, compete, even, heaven forbid, sweat. Yes, you've seen at least 3 people with flushed cheeks and a slight sheen. It's practically scandalous. As the sun begins to set, the last game wraps up with a dubious win, a toast involving diluted elderflower cordial, and someone dramatically quoting Byron for no apparent reason. You walk back toward the house with tired legs, grass-stained shoes, and the warm glow of having participated in a tradition that is equal parts competition and camaraderie. The lawn is dotted with forgotten balls, abandoned mallets, and one croquet hoop that was yanked from the ground and hurled during a rules dispute. The wind picks up. A few early stars appear, and as you reach the front steps, someone turns to you and says, "Same time tomorrow?" You nod. Of course, because in 1850, fun doesn't always need explosions or elaborate contraptions. Sometimes it just needs a ball, a stick, and a deeply repressed need to win. The morning begins with the kind of bright, hazy light that makes everything look slightly more romantic than it deserves. Dew clings to the grass like it's auditioning for a poetry collection, and the air smells faintly of coal smoke, wet leaves, and that one corner of the garden that always smells suspiciously like foxes. After yesterday's athletic dramatics with flying mallets and emotional wickets, today calls for something slower, something pastoral, something with just a hint of performance and a whole lot of posing. That's right. Today, you're going on a Victorian-style picnic. You're not alone in this endeavour, of course. A picnic is a social ritual, not just an excuse to eat outside while fending off insects. There's a whole system to it, layers of etiquette, logistics, and performative leisure that could rival a minor opera. In fact, by the time the household is ready to set off, it's unclear whether you're going to the countryside or preparing for a light military campaign. Blankets, parasols, collapsible furniture, baskets, hampers, a portable tea kettle, at least one footman, and a delicate porcelain teacup that someone insists is necessary. All of it must be packed. You're told to wear something practical, which in Victorian terms means a dress so stiff you could shelter under it if it rained. You strap on your boots, lace up your gloves, and grab your sun hat. By the time you're ready, you've already broken a light sweat and fought 3 buttons. You haven't even left the front gate yet. The journey is short but dramatic. A small cart carries the food, and the faintly rattled maid responsible for it. You and the rest of the group follow on foot, gossiping quietly, admiring trees, with just enough sincerity, and pretending not to notice how many bugs are already expressing interest in your ankles. The chosen picnic site is a gently sloping hill near a slow-moving stream, framed by wildflowers and one very photogenic oak tree that someone immediately claims for their sketching spot. Blankets are unfurled, cushions appear, baskets are unpacked with all the gravity of sacred relics. Out come the sandwiches, egg, cucumber, tongue if you're unlucky, alongside sponge cakes, pickled things in mysterious jars, and cold roast chicken that looks like it's been judging you since the moment it was carved. There's even a bottle of lemonade, though someone mutters about it being too bold for before noon. Here's your historical fact. By 1850, picnicking had become incredibly fashionable among the Victorian middle and upper classes. inspired in part by romantic ideals of nature, and in part by the practical need to escape stuffy interiors for a few hours. The Victorian picnic was both a culinary experience and a carefully curated aesthetic event. It wasn't just lunch outside, it was a leisure theatre, with cheese. You sit back against a tree nibbling on a biscuit that tastes faintly of soap and ash, common flavours in this era, and watch the group settle into their roles. One cousin begins reading aloud from a slim volume of poetry, projecting his voice like he's auditioning for Hamlet. Another unrolls a tiny chessboard and challenges anyone to a match, if they dare. Children run feral through the tall grass. Someone attempts a nap and is immediately punished by a butterfly landing on their nose. And then there's the sketching. Always the sketching. At least 3 people are drawing now. Landscapes, trees, each other. You try to peek over someone's shoulder and are gently rebuffed with a glare that says, "This is a private study of a tree branch and you are not invited." You take out your own sketchbook. Not to draw, necessarily, but to pretend to, which is half the point. You make a few vague lines. Something leafy. Possibly a dog. No one will ever see it, which is the best kind of art. Then comes the highlight of every picnic, the unexpected drama. In this case, it's a dog. A large, enthusiastic spaniel belonging to the vicar's daughter, who's apparently never taught it the meaning of restraint. It barrels through the picnic like a furred cannonball, scattering sandwiches, knocking over the chessboard, and launching itself directly into the stream with a triumphant bark, a splash, a shriek, general chaos. You dodge a flying meat pie and land in a hedge. It's glorious. Here's your quirky fringe fact. Some Victorian picnics were so elaborate that they featured hired musicians, tents with chandeliers, and even live theatrical performances. One account from 1853 describes a group who brought an entire upright piano into a field, along with 2 singers and a cook who made hot soup in a portable copper pot. It rained. Everyone caught colds, but the sandwiches were apparently excellent. Back in your picnic chaos, order is eventually restored. The dog is retrieved, soggy and delighted. The food is salvaged. The chess game is restarted from scratch because no one can agree on where the knight was. Someone tries to organise a group sing-along, which fizzles when half the group insists on God Save the Queen, while the other half insists on Greensleeves. A compromise is made. Home, Sweet Home, the musical equivalent of a soft sigh. Later in the afternoon, a few brave souls wander off for a nature walk. You tag along, boots squelching slightly in the wet grass. The path winds through trees and brambles. You find a little clearing where the sunlight hits the moss just right. Someone makes a speech about the spiritual serenity of dappled light. Someone else steps in a puddle. Nature, as always, offers both beauty and betrayal. There's scholarly debate, of course, about how spontaneous these picnics truly were. Diaries and etiquette guides suggest hours, days even, of planning went into them. Who would bring what? Where to sit? How to avoid impropriety while eating strawberries in public? Some argue picnics were a clever way to allow flirtation in a socially acceptable setting. Others see them as extensions of domestic roles, just with more grass and fewer walls. But regardless of the politics behind it, there's something undeniably soothing about this kind of fun. No machines, no tickets, just sun, food, laughter, and the constant low-level threat of ants. As the shadows grow longer, the picnic draws to a close. Blankets are shaken out, crumbs brushed away, leftover food repacked with the solemnity of wartime rations. You walk back toward the house with a full belly, a slightly sunburnt nose, and a newfound respect for cold roast vegetables. Someone suggests doing it again next week. Someone else, still holding a dripping chessboard, just groans. You smile. You'll come back. Maybe bring fewer sandwiches. Maybe sketch something that actually looks like a tree. But either way, you'll be there. Because in 1850, a picnic isn't just a meal. It's a performance, and you've just nailed your part. The air feels different this morning. Heavier somehow, charged with that low, humming energy that means something's about to happen. You step outside and the wind greets you with a slap of sea salt and coal dust, which is either bracing or disgusting depending on your mood. But you don't mind, because today you're doing something bold, adventurous, and a little risky. You're going to travel for fun. Not for family obligations, not for funerals or business or anything useful. Just for the thrill of movement, scenery, And maybe, a stick of suspicious seaside rock candy. Welcome to 1850s tourism, where every journey's an odyssey, and you're probably going to throw up before it's over. You don't have many options, transport-wise. You could take a coach, slow, jostling, full of people who think coughing into a handkerchief makes them immune to germs. Or you could take a train, which is relatively new, deeply dramatic, and smells like hot iron and anxiety. You choose the train. Of course you do. You're not here to casually sightsee. You want to arrive shaken, slightly soot-blackened, and exhilarated. At the station, everything feels like movement. People shouting, steam rising, horses stamping nervously. The train itself looms like a monster made of rivets and smoke. You've read about accidents, about spontaneous boiler explosions and derailments caused by cows, but you shove those thoughts deep down with the other quiet terrors that come with being alive in a century that hasn't quite worked out how physics works. Your compartment is wooden, cushioned in a way that suggests comfort was designed by someone who'd never sat down before. You share the space with a grandmother in widow's weeds, a businessman reading a pamphlet titled Righteous Thoughts on Canal Reform, and a young couple who are definitely pretending not to be married. You nod politely and try to figure out how to breathe without choking on soot. The whistle screams, the train lurches, and suddenly you're moving, not just down a track, but through a new version of reality. Trees flash by. Villages appear and vanish. Sheep scatter in slow motion. You feel a twinge of panic, a jolt of excitement, and a persistent vibration in your spine that will haunt you for hours. It's everything you hoped for. Here's your historical fact. By the 1850s, railway travel was transforming British life. Entire towns were suddenly within reach of a day trip. Seaside resorts like Brighton and Blackpool boomed, catering to travellers eager to escape the grime of city life for a bit of sand, salt air, and aggressively overpriced shell art. It was the beginning of tourism as we know it, not just the rich taking grand tours of Europe, but ordinary people taking little holidays, for fun, on purpose. But don't get too cosy. This train ride is short but intense. Somewhere between stations, the businessman begins singing to himself. The young couple breaks into an argument about sandwiches. The grandmother sneezes exactly 17 times in a row and then declares, "It's the devil in the air." You try to look out the window, only to realise it's coated in soot on the inside and outside. You are, for lack of a better word, filthy, but you're also smiling. When the train finally wheezes to a stop, you emerge slightly dazed, hair windblown, clothing crumpled in new and exciting ways. You've arrived at your destination, a small coastal town whose name includes the word on sea, just in case you forgot what the point was. The beach is everything you dreamed and slightly worse. There's sand, yes, but it's the gritty, pebble-studded kind that chews up your boots and hides broken bits. Of crab shell. The sea smells alive and slightly offended. Gulls screech overhead with a level of aggression usually reserved for debt collectors. You love it. People are everywhere, walking along the esplanade, licking melting ices, collecting shells in little baskets with moral superiority. Some wear full formal dress. Others, shockingly, are in what can only be described as casual bathing attire, which still covers 90% of their bodies but feels positively scandalous. You rent a striped changing tent and a pair of what resemble clown trousers with drawstrings. This is your swimming costume. You're not sure why you agreed to bathe, but you did, and now you're here, standing knee-deep in freezing salt water, screaming internally as tiny waves slap against your shins like disapproving grandmothers. A friend urges you farther out. You make it to waist height before rethinking all your decisions. Somewhere nearby, someone dunks under and comes up coughing. A woman shrieks when a fish brushes her leg. You retreat. Dignity intact, mostly. Back on the beach, you wrap yourself in a towel the size of a large doily and sip tepid tea from a paper cup. Someone passes you a fried eel in newspaper. You take a bite. It's exactly as rubbery and salty as you feared. A perfect seaside lunch. Here's your quirky fringe fact. In some coastal resorts, Victorians used bathing machines, wooden huts on wheels that could be rolled down into the surf. You'd change inside, then be pulled into the water by horses, emerging as if freshly born from a box of modesty. Some machines even had curtains that extended into the sea, in case someone nearby got ideas. It was the perfect solution to the problem of being human in public. After lunch you explore. There's a pier with coin-operated telescopes and souvenir stalls. You buy a bottle of coloured sand, a seashell glued to another seashell, and a card printed with a poem so bad it gives you indigestion. You write a postcard to someone you don't even like, just for the thrill of it. Having a lovely time. Wish you were here. Not really. Later you attend a short entertainment on the pier, featuring a ventriloquist and a pianist who only knows one song. The dummy insults everyone in the front row. The pianist just smiles. You laugh harder than you should. Maybe it's the sea air. Maybe it's the way travel makes everything feel like a slightly surreal dream. There's scholarly debate, of course, about the democratisation of leisure in the Victorian age. Did train travel really open the world to the masses, or just give the middle class another excuse to show off their parasols? Some historians argue that these seaside towns became microcosms of the same rigid social order people were trying to escape. Others say it was the start of something liberating, movement, exploration, joy without purpose. You're inclined to agree with the latter. As the sun begins to dip, you head back toward the station, hair-tangled, cheeks wind-burned, pockets full of sand and questionable mementos. The train hisses and steams like a beast ready to drag you home. You board, sink into the scratchy seat and watch the beach fade into mist. You're tired, sore, still damp, and you can't wait to do it again. You return from your seaside adventure still smelling faintly of seaweed and fried something. Not unpleasant, just distinct. There's sand in your boots, your hat's gone permanently limp from the salty breeze, and you may never emotionally recover from the eel. But before you can collapse into bed for a week, your neighbour leans out their window and shouts, "You're coming to the parade, aren't you? The Queen's likeness is nearly finished." And just like that, your plans for quiet reflection are out the window. Tonight you're experiencing a whole different kind of fun. Royal watching and public spectacle. It starts, as all good Victorian events do, with a slight sense of panic. You are not mentally prepared to stand in a crowd of overly patriotic strangers for 3 hours. But apparently, Queen Victoria's birthday, or possibly just her portrait's birthday, is cause enough for mass celebration. Streets are being swept, children are being forcibly washed, and flags are appearing like mushrooms after rain. Some of them even have her actual face on them, which feels a little intense, but okay. The town square is already filling when you arrive. There are garlands strung between gas lamps, a slightly crooked banner that says "Long Live the Queen" and Prince Albert too, I guess, and a brass band warming up by playing what may or may not be the national anthem in reverse. A giant papier-mâché effigy of Her Majesty stands in the centre of the square, looking both regal and deeply uncomfortable, like she knows someone's going to set her on fire by accident before the night is over. You find a spot near the bakery, mostly for strategic access to jam tarts. People around you are buzzing with excitement. Children are waving wooden Union Jacks and accidentally poking strangers in the eye. A man selling boiled sweets shouts, "A penny for Her Majesty's honour," which sounds threatening but is probably just good marketing. The parade begins with a poorly timed drum roll and a brass band marching out of sync. Everyone claps anyway. Then come the schoolchildren dressed in seasonal costumes, mayflowers, bees, and one unfortunate lad dressed as the Thames. He looks like he's carrying an entire river on his shoulders. He waves solemnly. He trips over a rock and is scooped up by a teacher with the speed of a battlefield medic. Then come the village dignitaries, riding in a mismatched procession of carriages, wheelbarrows, and what appears to be a goat cart. Each bows solemnly to the crowd, receiving lukewarm applause and the occasional sarcastic comment. A local magistrate throws barley sugar to the children. One hits you in the temple. You pretend not to cry. Here's your historical fact. In 1850, royal events were a huge part of public life. Whether it was the Queen's birthday, a royal wedding, or just an excuse to show off loyalty to the crown, these spectacles unified communities. Street parties, parades, and firework displays were all common. They gave people something to gather round, even if they had wildly different opinions about what they were actually celebrating. Of course, not all public spectacles were joyful. You've heard stories of past crowds gathering to witness public punishments, executions, floggings, trials held in open air. Until 1868, hanging was still a public event, often attended by thousands. Vendors would set up stalls selling food, drinks and pamphlets describing the crime in lurid detail. A day out for the whole family, if your family happened to enjoy murder ballads and moralizing sermons shouted over sobbing prisoners. That kind of spectacle has mostly disappeared from polite society by 1850. Mostly. But its spirit lingers, transferred into these grand civic displays. Now, instead of watching someone lose their life, you're watching the mayor struggle to climb a podium without falling off. Progress. Back in the square, the Queen's effigy is being serenaded by a children's choir. They sing something about roses, England, and eternal glory. Most of them are off-key. A few are clearly just mouthing along. One little girl waves to her mother and forgets to sing entirely. It's beautiful in that chaotic, earnest way only public singing can be. You glance around the crowd. There are old veterans in tattered uniforms, women with babies strapped to their backs, farmers with mud still on their boots, and everyone, regardless of rank or fashion, is here for the same thing. A reason to cheer, to look upward, to point at something bright and say, that matters. Then come the fireworks, because nothing says respect for the monarchy like explosions near rooftops. You're warned to cover your ears, which you do, just in time for the first shriek of light to shoot into the sky and burst in a shower of red and gold sparks. Children scream with delight, adults flinch, a pigeon panics and dive bombs a snack cart. It's magnificent. The sky lights up with each new burst. Starbursts, spirals, a few accidental side blasts that make the whole crowd take a step back. One firework explodes in the shape of a heart. Another fizzles out in a puff of sad smoke. The Queen's effigy somehow survives it all, though she now looks slightly singed and more judgmental than usual. Here's your quirky fringe fact. During Queen Victoria's reign, some local parades included theatrical reenactments of battles, with townsfolk dressing up in full military regalia, using fake cannons and dramatically dying in slow motion. One village accidentally used real gunpowder. No one died, but the town square had a very real crater and an equally real lawsuit. There's scholarly debate about whether all this royal spectacle reinforced social cohesion or just distracted people from the crushing reality of industrial life. Was it patriotism, performance, a safety valve for unrest? Probably all three. But there's no denying the emotional pull of shared celebration, even if that celebration is built around a papier-mâché queen wobbling in the wind. As the fireworks fade and the smoke drifts across the square like the ghost of national pride, people begin to gather their things. Children fall asleep mid-step. Vendors pack up with practiced speed. You wipe soot from your coat and brush bits of firework ash from your hair. Someone starts singing God Save the Queen. Others join in. You hum along. Not because you're feeling especially monarchist tonight, but because everyone else is, and sometimes that's enough. The streets are still glowing as you walk home. The laughter still echoes, and in the window of a nearby house you see a tiny flag still fluttering. It's been wedged into a flower pot, probably forgotten. But it waves anyway. You smile. Royalty aside, there's something oddly comforting about a society that will dress up, light things on fire and sing out of tune just to feel together for a moment. By now, your sense of time has unravelled a little. It's hard to tell if it's Tuesday, Thursday, or one of those vague in-between days the Victorians never bothered to name. After a week filled with lawn sports, freak shows, fried eels, and accidentally patriotic parades, your soul is aching. Not from sorrow, but from overstimulation. You need something quieter, more refined, preferably indoors, with very little chance of being hit by a flying mallet or a rogue goat. So when someone suggests you join an evening of parlour games and salon theatrics, you leap at the opportunity. Mostly because parlour implies furniture and snacks. The drawing room is already bustling by the time you arrive. Lamps are lit, cushions fluffed, curtains drawn. The furniture has been pushed back to clear a makeshift stage in front of the hearth. A square rug dramatically designated as the performance zone. A tray of biscuits and lemonade sits on a sideboard, guarded by a girl who looks like she will fight anyone who touches the ginger nuts before intermission. You're welcomed with the kind of cheerful chaos that always precedes an amateur performance. Someone's aunt is applying too much rouge in the corner. A cousin is muttering lines under their breath while holding a prop sword made from a broomstick and two tied-on forks. Someone else is wrangling a stubborn paper moustache that refuses to stay on. It's all absurd and perfect. The host announces the evening's programme with great flourish, charades, tableaux vivants, and a short, dramatic interpretation of Hamlet featuring sock puppets. The crowd claps. You suppress a feeling of deep spiritual dread. The sock puppets are already grinning at you from the mantel. The festivities begin with charades, not the frantic mime fests you know today, but the slow-burning Victorian kind. In this version, each word is acted out in solemn pantomime, followed by the assembled group trying to guess the entire phrase with the seriousness of a parliamentary debate. The first challenge is Pride and Prejudice. It takes 25 minutes, a broken fan, and 3 arguments about whether smelling your own glove counts as pride, but eventually someone guesses correctly. Cheers erupt. Lemonade is consumed. A biscuit goes missing. Here's your historical fact. Parlour games were a centrepiece of Victorian domestic life, especially during long evenings without electric lights or central heating. Games like charades, blind man's bluff, 20 questions, and the ever-popular who can tell the most dramatic lie without blinking were common. These weren't just distractions. They were social strategy. A way to flirt without saying so, to impress without being obnoxious, and to gather without the burden of talking about politics or death. The next game is tableaux vivants, or living pictures, if you want to be less French about it. The idea is simple. Recreate a famous painting or historical scene using only your body, nearby fabrics, and whatever furniture you can sit very still on for 3 minutes without sneezing. It's not supposed to be funny. It will be funny. Your group attempts the death of Julius Caesar. Someone wears a sheet. Someone else stands behind them with a wooden spoon. You're cast as a minor senator and instructed to look betrayed. You do your best. The final result looks less like a Roman tragedy and more like a group of people fainting in a laundry basket, but no one minds. The applause is polite. Someone weeps from laughter. You bow anyway. Then comes the headliner, the sock puppet Hamlet. There are 6 socks, all with different buttons for eyes and hastily inked on facial hair. The cast performs their version of Act 5 with a blend of overwrought drama and confusing accents. Alas, poor Yorick is delivered by a puppet that looks like it's just emerged from a washing machine. Ophelia is voiced in falsetto by a teenage boy who keeps forgetting his lines. The duel is acted out with cocktail skewers and sound effects like pew pew. Everyone is delighted. Someone yells encore, someone else whispers never again. And here's your quirky fringe fact. Victorian parlour theatrics weren't always light-hearted. Some households staged full candlelit productions of Shakespeare or the Brontes, complete with costumes, painted backdrops, and live musical accompaniment from whoever could sort of play the harpsichord. One enthusiastic family in 1849 even built a mini-stage in their library and charged guests a penny for admission, which they donated to orphans and undesirable animals. The dog selection process remains unclear. Back in your parlour, things are winding down. The final act is a dramatic reading of original poetry written by our dear cousin Margaret, which turns out to be 47 stanzas of emotional devastation about a cloud. A few people cry, a few others pretend to cry. You consider climbing out the window but stay for the biscuits. After the applause fades and the chairs are rearranged, people settle into smaller groups. There's quiet conversation, shared laughter, and that particular coziness that only comes when everyone's been slightly embarrassed in front of everyone else. You realise that the real fun wasn't in the games or the performances, but in getting away with it, looking foolish on purpose, letting go for a while. There's scholarly debate about whether these parlour entertainments were sincere artistic pursuits, or just ways for bored Victorians to fill time between death and digestion. But most agree they served a real social function. In a world where conversation was a minefield and leisure a luxury, parlour games gave people permission to play, to perform, to step outside themselves, even if only for the length of a sock puppet soliloquy. You linger by the hearth as the group begins to drift off. A few people stay behind to gather props, rescue abandoned shawls, and finish the last of the lemonade. The room is warm, softly lit, filled with the ghost of laughter. Someone hands you a biscuit and says, "You are a very convincing senator." You take a bite, smile and say, "I tried." Because in 1850, fun didn't always mean running, travelling, or surviving acrobatics. Sometimes it just meant being silly, together, on purpose. You're beginning to suspect that Victorians never actually stopped for a moment of silence. Not unless someone died, and even then there was probably a hymn involved. The sheer volume of social activity is impressive, exhausting, and slightly terrifying. You've picnicked, paraded, played croquet, and been emotionally scarred by sock puppet Shakespeare. You've shouted over brass bands, survived train travel, and eaten things that still haunt your palate. And yet, there's one last curveball on the cultural calendar before the year winds to a close, the séance. Yes, that's right. Tonight, you're speaking to the dead. Or at least watching someone else pretend to. It all begins with a cryptic whisper from your neighbour. The medium is coming tonight. You look up from your lukewarm tea and squint. The what now? She leans in, eyes wide with delicious conspiracy. The medium, a real one, American I think, she can summon spirits. You raise a sceptical eyebrow. Last time she spoke to a sailor from beyond the veil, said his boots were still damp. Your other eyebrow joins the first. Bring a scarf. It gets cold when the spirits arrive. And with that, you're committed. You arrive that evening to a parlour arranged with meticulous spooky flair. The curtains are drawn. All mirrors are covered. The fireplace is lit but burning low, casting flickering shadows that make every houseplant look like it wants to murder you. A round table sits in the centre of the room, surrounded by chairs and topped with a lace cloth, a single candle, and a crystal bell that looks like it's never been successfully rung without summoning regret. The guests arrive in silence, as if afraid to speak too loudly and wake a ghost too early. There's a widow in jet black silk with a veil that sways when she breathes, a man with mutton chops and a pipe he refuses to put down, two sisters with matching lockets and a shared expression of nervous excitement. You're not sure what you're doing here, but it feels oddly cosy, like everyone's slightly scared but also secretly hoping something happens, preferably something dramatic. The medium enters last. She's tall, pale, draped in shawls and beads, and walks like her feet barely touch the floor. She speaks softly but with absolute authority, the kind of voice that says, "I may have just made this up, but I dare you to question me." She invites everyone to take their seats and place their hands gently on the table. No talking, no laughing, and for the love of all things Victorian, no breaking the circle. The candle flickers, the room stills. She closes her eyes. The séance begins. Here's your historical fact. By the 1850s, spiritualism had become a full-blown movement, originating in the United States in the late 1840s with the Fox sisters, who claimed they could communicate with spirits via rapping sounds. It swept across Europe like a spectral fever. Mediums were suddenly everywhere. Women, and occasionally men, who claimed to hear the dead, channel spirits, or produce ectoplasm during trances. Séances became evening entertainment, especially among the upper and middle classes. They offered emotional comfort, social intrigue, and, let's be honest, just the right amount of theatrical suspense. Tonight's medium is clearly a performer. She sways slightly, murmuring words that sound half Latin, half dream. The candle flickers harder. Your hand twitches, and someone across the circle gasps. "They're here," she whispers. "They are near." A sudden rap sounds from beneath the table. You nearly leap out of your chair. More knocks follow, sharp, deliberate. The medium asks questions. "Is there a spirit present?" Rap. "Are you at peace?" 2 raps. "Do you have a message?" Silence. Then, slowly, the bell begins to tremble. It rings, clear and high and far too delicate to have moved on its own. Someone whispers, "Is it my mother?" The medium nods slowly. She says, "She's watching." She says you left the milk out again. The table jerks slightly. You try not to scream. Here's your fringe fact. Some séances included spirit photography, where ghostly images would appear beside the living in portraits. Spoiler alert, most were faked using double exposure or smudged plates. But people believed. In a world reeling from industrialization, war and high mortality rates, especially for children, spiritualism offered a lifeline, a sense that death wasn't a wall, but a curtain, one that could be parted by candlelight. Back in the parlor, the séance continues. The medium begins speaking in a deep, altered voice, allegedly a spirit named Jonathan who died at sea under a full moon. Jonathan is very concerned about someone's love life, warns against marrying a man named Rupert, and requests that someone remove the cabbage from the pantry. Eventually the energy wanes. The medium exhales, slowly opens her eyes, and announces, "The veil is closing." Everyone lets go of the table. The bell stills. The room feels heavier, and also slightly more absurd. The widow dabs her eyes with a handkerchief. The sisters whisper to each other. The mutton-chopped man finally takes a puff of his pipe and mutters, "Well, she got the cabbage bit right." There's scholarly debate, of course, about the true nature of these events. Were they scams, delusions, or sincere attempts to grapple with grief? Some historians believe mediums used their status to speak out in ways other women couldn't, offering spiritual guidance, advice, and even subtle critiques of power under the guise of messages from beyond. Others argue that it was mostly clever trickery, using sleight of hand, secret accomplices, and well-placed wires to simulate the supernatural. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. But regardless of your belief, or skepticism, there's no denying the appeal of a séance. It's structured mystery, safe terror, a space where emotions can float to the surface and be dressed in the clothes of the dead, where fear becomes fascination, where silence speaks. As the guests begin to leave, the medium retreats to the corner, sipping something that smells like licorice and brandy. You catch her eye. She winks. You're not sure if that's comforting or alarming. Outside, the night is soft and still. The stars are dim. The breeze stirs the trees like whispered names. You walk home slower than usual. Not because you're afraid, just in case someone's walking beside you. You wake up the next morning half convinced that a ghost is still watching you from the corner of the room. Turns out it's just your coat slung over a chair in a vaguely sinister pose, but still, last night's séance left an impression. The kind that lingers in the back of your mind, like the tail end of a dream, or the smell of smoke in your hair after a bonfire. It's the final day of your long, strange walk through Victorian fun, and somehow you're both satisfied, and still craving more. Which is why, after some debate and exactly one piece of buttered toast, you decide to do something that ties everything together. Something cozy, educational, quietly chaotic, and just a little bit self-important. Today you're going to the museum, or as the Victorians like to call it, the temple of knowledge where no one is ever warm enough. The museum sits at the edge of town, a grand stone building with too many steps and a facade that looks like it's judging you. Inside, everything smells like paper, polish, and centuries-old dust. The entrance hall is vast and echoing, with a few lonely marble busts of people who definitely believed in phrenology. A bored attendant greets you without looking up from his crossword, and you're waved into the first exhibit room with the enthusiasm of a man who's watched one too many children throw up near an Egyptian sarcophagus. You begin with the natural history section, which is every bit as strange and wonderful as you hoped. Taxidermy animals stare blankly from behind glass, posed in ways no living creature ever has or should. There's a fox mid-pounce that looks like it just got bad news, a bear with one paw raised like it's about to order tea, and of course, the pièce de résistance, a badly stuffed platypus that appears to be melting under the weight of its own confusion. You stand in silent reverence. Victorian museums weren't just about entertainment, they were about impressing you into submission. Everything here is labelled in elegant fading script. Latin names, dates, places, and deeply biased observations. A cabinet of beetles boasts a handwritten sign, discovered in the steamy jungles of the Orient, very probably poisonous. Approach with mental caution. You nod solemnly, as if you too are feeling spiritually endangered by a pinned beetle. Here's your historical fact. Public museums became increasingly popular in the 19th century, especially after the British Museum Act of 1753 and the opening of regional institutions throughout the Victorian era. These museums weren't just for the elite anymore. They were accessible to the curious masses, offering a structured way to explore science, history, art, and colonial conquest disguised as cultural curiosity. The British Empire had a lot of artefacts. It needed a lot of rooms to put them in. Next, you move into the wonders of the East Room, and everything gets noticeably more complicated. There are mummies in glass cases, ceremonial swords labelled probably used in ritual, and a collection of jade figurines arranged by someone who clearly had never been east of Brighton. The room is dimly lit and deeply unsettling. You overhear one visitor whisper, "Is that cursed?" And another reply, "Well, it looks cursed." You don't linger. You cross into a gallery of mechanical oddities where Victorian inventors let their imaginations run wild and their engineering skills run wild in the wrong direction. Here's a brass and wood contraption designed to wake you up with the sound of chickens screaming, a steam-powered tea stirrer that once exploded at a garden party, a personal dust remover that's just a fan on a stick, wielded by a deeply resentful servant in the accompanying illustration. The Victorians were, above all, committed to unnecessary innovation. And here's your fringe fact. In 1851, the Great Exhibition at the Crystal Palace showcased thousands of these inventions from all over the world, attracting millions of visitors. Some devices were marvels of science, others were barely functional disasters, presented with the confidence of a mediocre magician. One memorable invention was a pocket railway consisting of a chair on wheels and a hand crank. It went about 3 feet before flipping over. Back in the museum, you find yourself drifting into the Hall of Portraits, where oil paintings of stiff-backed, high-collared ancestors glare at you from the walls. Each plaque offers a name, a title, and usually some dubious achievement. Sir Percival Ashcroft, who once supposedly met Napoleon. Dame Judith Bramble, known for hosting. Exceptionally long dinners. You stare at their unsmiling faces and try to imagine them at a picnic, or fumbling through charades, or screaming as a firework misfires near their parasol. It's oddly humanising. Eventually you stumble into the museum gift shop, which is more of a dusty cabinet of curiosities than a retail establishment. There are postcards of paintings with incorrect dates, small jars of genuine Roman soil that are probably just dirt from the garden, and a stuffed mouse in Victorian dress posed in a tiny rocking chair. You buy the mouse. Of course you do. Its name is now Reginald, and he will sit on your bookshelf forever, judging you in silence. You step out of the museum into fading afternoon light. Your coat smells faintly of varnish. Your head is filled with facts you'll immediately forget, and your heart is full in that particular way that comes from wandering among the echoing halls of human ambition, failure, and dust. There's scholarly debate, naturally, about the purpose of these museums. Were they educational, propaganda, shrines to empire, attempts to preserve culture, or just display it like a trophy? The answer, as always, is yes. But whatever their motives, museums gave Victorians a glimpse of the vast, strange world outside their soot-covered window panes. And they gave people like you, tired from too many picnics and suspicious meets, a chance to sit quietly and be amazed. You take one last look over your shoulder. The museum doors stand tall and close behind you, holding centuries of objects and stories you couldn't finish in a day. That's all right. You'll be back. After all, in 1850, fun wasn't just in the loud, the wild, or the absurd. Sometimes, it whispered. Sometimes it stood still in a glass case and dared you to pay attention. And just like that, your journey through Victorian fun comes to a gentle close. You've wandered parlours and garden parties, gasped at fire-lit magic shows, stumbled through cricket matches, and eaten food that defied both logic and basic seasoning. You've witnessed sock puppet Shakespeare, been nearly trampled at a royal parade, and maybe, just maybe, spoken to someone from beyond the veil. It's been chaotic, it's been a little exhausting, and it's been unexpectedly beautiful in the way only slightly damp, overcomplicated fun can be. You didn't need electricity, you didn't need screens or apps or the kind of serotonin that comes from watching a cat fall off a shelf in high definition. The Victorians made do with what they had. Words, music, tea, an almost pathological love of croquet, and a deeply committed fear of idleness. You played games, told ghost stories, admired clouds like they were divine omens, and clapped politely for your cousin even when their harmonium performance felt like a test from the universe. What stands out most isn't any one event or spectacle. It's the rhythm of it all. the layered texture of fun stitched into everyday life, the way entertainment was a shared act, not just a service, the way people invented joy out of paper scraps, awkward conversations and a good fire. They leaned into the absurd, the eerie, the ridiculous and sublime. They turned boredom into performance art, and somehow it worked. Maybe it still does. So as you return to your own time, your own lights and screens and soft electric blankets, take a piece of that energy with you. The patience, the weirdness. The idea that fun doesn't always have to be loud, expensive, or even convenient. Sometimes it's just a moment, a ridiculous hat, a song you sing slightly off-key with people you sort of like, a chance to imagine the world slightly sideways. Now take a deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. You've travelled a long way. Across time, across manners, across at least 4 disastrous sandwiches. Dim the lights. The embers are low. Reginald the judgmental taxidermy mouse is already asleep in his tiny